this shit off. Angry Black Man's Book Club. Hey, come on in. It's a special edition. I got a mirror for that. But some of this is just so damn cool. I just. Mm, mm. Hey, y'all, I'm ready. Let me see. Give me a couple seconds. Let some people get up in here. Angry Black Men's Book Club. Oh my God. Yes, I got, man, I got some treats. I have treats. Angry Black Men's Book Club. I love it. Do you know? In just like a day or so, I'm gonna be back in Fake Book. Do y'all realize when this thing builds up? I'm just telling y'all, the Angry Black Men's Book Club. It's gonna be so many people right now. There's like one person. I told these Negroes to come back. So let me see. Let me give them a few seconds. Maybe they grabbed a drink or I hope not a blunt. Let me get a cushion because that thing was killing my behind, man. Lord Jesus. I got to do something about that. Ah, oh, Jesus. Wow. A serious cushion up under here. This, this thing was kicking me in the behind. Okay. This, oh, I forgot about that wire there. I have to remember I got these cables on all sides. Okay. There's 7. There's 4. Oh, yes. Oh, that feels so much better. Now I got my stuff lined up. I think everybody went to sleep. I thought their asses were gonna stay up because I'll just go to bed. Um, I need to put this up a little bit. Yeah, I had to put some of that. There's like a piece of wood in this seat, and God, I felt like I was in prison. This shit hurt so much. Damn, I had to put. I'm not made for that. No, I'd have to die. I couldn't live in jail. I had to kill somebody. That was just too much. Let me see. Uh, let's see. Say 22. Okay, there's 6 people. Y'all want to wait until 8:30? But I'm prepared. I've got the books stacked up. I'm gonna pick some of these short ones. Just go in on some stuff. Oh my, eugenics. Hey, Black Power to you. MFM to everybody. I'm thinking of we're gonna be doing racism and let me see. Put a couple of new people in and yeah, we go kill it today. We go do a marathon. MFM to y'all. I didn't greet y'all, and I greeting MFM. We do need our money. I mean, the way that they didn't shoot the people at the Capitol, it's because they had that perception that white is important. MFM, everybody. Let me see if I can pull. Um, well, let me see. I'll just let this lay. Let my phone sit for a second. And ah, oh, I feel so much better. My back's supported. All right. And if this is just us, if it's just us, it's cool. I just want to make certain. Let me see. Almost ready. MFM to you. MFM to everybody. By the way, do give me some likes. Treat me like I'm white. Give me some likes. Um, it's 14 and 15. Oh, let's see, 20 is almost a quorum. Come on. Let's get to 25 so I can move. Because you know what? Negroes ask lots of questions and shit when they come late, which I don't understand. Okay, it's moving there. 16. That's 22. We need 3 more. I want to get to 25 and then I'm going to start. I should get a banana or something. Okay, 17 and 6, that's close. Come on, y'all. Now these people said they'd come back and they're gone. Okay, they must have gone to work or gone to sleep. Okay, 8, still not there. I need 2 more. Where is everybody? MFM to everybody. And let me put this on just YouTube. Okay, what? Let the word go out for a minute. Okay, I'll start at approximately 5 minutes. But I got my books. I'm trying to think which one I want to do first. Uh, Wonderful. 30. I'm going to read 3. Good. 19 and 9. We're just about there. I'm gonna, wow. Wow, this is high up there, this thing. Okay, I feel like I'm riding a horse. Let me get this banana. I'll be right back. Whew. Whew. All right. We got our quorum. Hold on. I'm going to put this here and put the other one in the back. There are 27 people. It's approximately 8:30. Welcome to the Angry Black Men's Book Club. And we're going to be reading about racism, sexuality, eugenics, all junky, trashy, but important topics. And I'm going to just bury some books, just some stuff y'all should look at. This is going to be really a short read. I just want y'all to know this because this is connected to everything that's going on right now. This book here is called The Lavender Look, A Lavender Look at the Temple. This is written by an LGBTQ person talking about the genocide of black people at the hands of gays in South America. Okay? I don't do Mark from Anaheim. Okay? So if you want them, he's all over the place. I don't get it. We all have our favorites. Find him. Good luck. Certain people like him. To me, say who you are. Everybody knows there's no way you can hide. There's something to that I don't get. You know what I look like. You know what I am. To me, Dick Gregory let people know who he was. So I don't look favorably on people who can't be who they are. I don't find that courageous or admirable. That's how he wants to do it. Do it somewhere else. I'd like to know who I'm talking to. And if I'm not good enough to know, I shouldn't be good enough to talk to. So people that like that, enjoy it. I'm not interested in mystery. I'm talking about stuff that are facts. You can document, you can pick up a copy. I'm going to put up this name right now. This book is called, and I'm going to read portions of it. We're going to go through these faster than normal. I don't want to read this whole book, I'll just be honest with you. I just want y'all to understand some of these people you look up to. I'm going to do this one first so I can just get rid of it. I don't like the font on it, but I'm going to read it and move on. I'm going to put this up for a couple of minutes. A lavender look, and as for you that are out here, I'm holding it up. It's a lavender look at the People's Temple. This is all being recorded. Please don't call and ask me about it. You can simply wait when it's posted and go back and scroll through it. Trust me, that's what they do at the universities and everywhere else. Here it is. All right. I'm going to get right down to this. I'm in chapter. Which chapter is this? Chapter 4. I think y'all know about Jonestown, Guyana, the largest massacre of Americans in history, and it's one of the largest massacres of blacks in American history. It happened at the hands of cover-up by people like Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Barbara Boxer, Feinstein, some of the very same people that in this dark struggle that's going on right now. Y'all need to understand what we were not told. We just told these people are crazy. We were not told what was really going on. So let me just get into this. This is chapter 4. The People's Temple and the Gay Community. Once settled into San Francisco's People's Temple began to focus its energies on cultivating substantive, influential, and political clout throughout California. Yeah. Let me just call someone. This is like disrupting my flow. Yeah, no, I'm not. No, no, nope. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, no. I'm doing yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm doing a reading. I didn't answer. I'll keep moving. I'm sorry. That happens when you have family. I'm going to go back and do this again. Pardon me. Play it off. Once settled into San Francisco, the People's Temple began to focus its energies on cultivating substantive and influential political clout throughout California. By 1976, 3 of San Francisco's top elected officials, Mayor George Moscone, District Attorney Joseph Freitas, and Sheriff Richard Hangisto, had the strong support of Jim Jones and the volunteer work of hundreds of temple members. Well, I want to say the whole thing. I'm sorry. As a reward for his help in the election, Moscone appointed Jones to chair the city's powerful Housing Commission. The temple support came to be considered so crucial that, as California Assemblyman Willie Brown remarked, in a tight race, forget it without Jones. Let me just remind you that the district attorney for San Francisco recently was Kamala Harris, and Willie Jones is her boyfriend. I want you to get that. Willie Brown was the Speaker of the House in California. All this queer stuff you see came out the Bay Area, and it's connected. Even Kamala now, this is the People's Temple's imprint on America, and it's LGBTQ. Okay. One of the many politicians who came to People's Temple was Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official, used to visit the People's Temple. A gay East Coast transplant who moved into the Castro district and became involved in local politics. After failed campaigns for both the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and California State Assembly, Harvey Milk won a seat on the Board of Supervisors in 1977. Milk is often mistakenly referred to as America's first openly gay official. That honor instead goes to Elaine Noble, who was a lesbian elected to the Massachusetts State Assembly in 1974, while the first elected gay man was Jim Yelden in Madison, Wisconsin, City Council of May of 1977 after serving one term as an appointed member. Harvey Milk was attracted to the People's Temple for a number of reasons. Not only was there support from the temple for the pivotal local elections, Milk was also drawn to the church's, listen to this, very public pro-gay positions. Additionally, Milk recognized that the temple was actively and effectively confronting the issues that were so important to the time: racism, poverty, war, and the ever-present specter of nuclear annihilation. You want to understand where Black Lives Matter comes out of San Francisco and the Bay Area. The precursors to Black Lives Matter were connected to the People's Temple. Eric Mann and others had a relationship with Jim Jones because he's a communist. I'm bringing this up because there are going to be protests all over this country, possibly in the next few days. There may be violence. These people may want violence and they want to do this. You may see a significant number of Black people die yet again, and they're being played because they don't read or pay attention or study. Many Americans felt the nuclear war was inevitable. Coupled with this fear was a fundamental and widespread belief that individuals had the power to enact change, which was fueled by a newfound moral imperative to challenge the actions of their elected officials. Many people experimented with different living situations, and groups formed with varying structures, from egalitarian communes to patriarchal-based families. The People's Temple merged the two models. San Francisco especially nourished a leftist counterculture that confronted the establishment's approach to almost every problem facing the country, both foreign and domestic. The gay and lesbian community in San Francisco was not immune to this wave of utopianism. As one letter to San Francisco gay newspaper written in February 1976, thus the stage is set for potential endless violent conflicts, perhaps nuclear annihilation, as the poor have-nots of the planet become increasingly aware, powerful, and resistant of being bought off or co-opted by anything less than an equal share. Nothing is more indicative of the persuasive, progressive bent on the gay community than the 1976 Gay Pride Parade. Instructions to its contingents with floats: no ageist, no sexist, no racist or classist displays, and any group that spends more than $500 on the float are encouraged to match that amount in a donation to a gay and lesbian alcohol recovery program. Certainly, a church that espoused the brand of progressive religious activism would have found fertile ground in San Francisco during the 70s. With its public support of gay and lesbian people, the People's Temple was positioned to become that church. Indeed, there was much about the People's Temple philosophy that would have attracted gay and lesbian identified people, those seeking a spiritual outlet and or those of progressive persuasion. The temple, founded on the Congregationalist family, Jim Jones evolved over time into father, and Marceline became mother. In adopting a socialist approach, the interracial congregation referred to each other as brother and sister. The creation of the congregation as a new family would be attractive not only to people who had a negative family experience, but to those who were looking for replaced loved ones. Many gays and lesbians have difficulty coming out to their families, oftentimes resulting in irreparable damage. This is not to perpetuate the idea that all queers have a hard time coming out to their families. However, especially in the 70s, many people came to San Francisco to escape the not so subtle homophobia, which is just as much a part of the American cultural fabric as racism, sexism, and class bias. The definition and focus on the congregation as family, with each other member as a brother and a sister, as well as attention to the senior members who would have had broad appeal in searching for such stability, whether they were queer, identified, or not. The People's Temple publicly demanded support for gay people at a time that a majority of Americans were hostile to homosexuals. Almost every edition of the People's Forum, the Temple's newspaper, was delivered to most neighborhoods in San Francisco, carried a story about discrimination against gays and lesbians. The stories varied from exposés about police raids on gay bars and anti-gay police stings in public parks and to gay bashing alerts and pieces about Nazi atrocities towards gays. This is the People's Temple newspaper. Despite the many pro-gay stories, the People's Forum articles didn't always receive the expected response. One gay letter writer of note, Jim Sherwood moved to D.C., y'all. He was someone who just died, who's into black dudes, who was racist. I'm just telling you. God, I didn't know this. Jim Sherwood responded to an article in March 1977, edition about Jones' visit to Cuba. Jones had met with exiled Black Panther leader Huey Newton, who fled America to avoid trumped-up felony murder charges. Newton's parents were members of the People's Temple. I repeat, Black Panther founder Huey Newton's parents were members of the People's Temple. Jim Jones worked with the CIA black folks. It was a trap. It was a trap. I repeat, Huey Newton's parents went to the People's Temple, as was his cousin, Jamestown survivor Stanley Clayton. The People's Forum article reported that Jones had talked to a number of Cubans about their living conditions, but had asked Newton about the quality of life for gays and lesbians in Cuba. Questioning the Panthers' ability to speak on behalf of homosexuals, Sherwood took Jones to task for asking Newton about gay issues instead of demanding to speak directly to gays and lesbians themselves, and challenged the People's Forum spin that life for gays was terrible in America and great in Cuba. Persecution of gay people in Cuba seems to be a fact. I'd say they ought to criticize injustice everywhere, not just in America. Another article of note in March 1977 edition of the People's Forum described acceptance in Guyana of a bisexual actress. This piece really a promotion piece for Guyana, especially the openness of Guyanese, but also indicative of the importance, at least rhetorically, of the People's Temple philosophically based on acceptance of sexual minorities. That one of the most widely circulated papers in San Francisco would write such controversial stories had to have had appeal to a queer readership and certainly did not go unnoticed in the gay press. Thomas Edwards, a well-known gay conservative columnist, wrote in the March 24, 1977 edition of the gay newspaper, The Sentinel, that the staff of the People's Forum was comprised of revolutionary militants, terrorists, and persons of radical philosophy who were responsible for the election of Mayor George Moscone, the bane of conservatives, as well as District Attorney Joe Freitas and Sheriff Richard Hopgisto. And Edwards' columns on the right ran opposite another column far to the left, occasionally written by Harvey Milk. The following edition of the far left column by Randy Alford responded to Edwards' assertion. Here in San Francisco, the People's Temple, under the leadership of Jim Jones, is a fine example of a group understanding that freedom is truly indivisible. The People's Temple, predominantly black, has joined the Florida citrus boycott and intends to send a delegation to the Gay Freedom Day Parade. A group that knows fascism must be fought not only in Chile but right here in our daily lives. The Temple spokesperson Michael Prokes also criticized Edwards' column, leading the Sentinel editors to reply. The People's Forum readily carried excellent article on Nazi extermination of gay people. The Sentinel strongly supports the efforts of groups such as the People's Temple to develop solidarity in San Francisco. I want to bring to your mind, folks, that the communists, socialists, when you hear that, they've been with the LGBTQ since the 70s. So when you hear all this socialism that you're told is good and everyone's praising it, it has nothing to do with the equal distribution of wealth. It's the sexuality stuff. And we're going for it hook, line, and sinker. Not only did the People's Temple send a delegation to the 1977 Gay Pride Parade, they also had a member speak at the rally after the parade. The official schedule for the parade day listed 10 speakers, including a speech by Mike Prokes titled Straight Support for Gay People, along with well-known San Francisco activist Margot St. James. People's Temple involvement in the Florida citrus boycott was no small act. By the late 70s, a number of ordinances protecting the rights of gays and lesbians from discrimination in employment and housing had been passed in various communities. In Dade County, Florida, however, former Miss America Anita Bryant launched a counter campaign titled Save Our Children to repeal the pro-gay ordinances. Using the basis stereotypes of the gay predator, Bryant's forces successfully overturned the ordinances on June 7, 1977. Bolstered by a 7-3 margin, the conservative forces immediately began promoting similar initiatives around the country. Soon, laws battling the anti-gay discrimination were repealed in Eugene, Oregon, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wichita, Kansas. In California, the effort manifested in the form of the Briggs Initiative, Proposition 6, which would have prohibited people open about their homosexuality from being employed as teachers in the public school system. Gay men and lesbians around the country mobilized targeting advertisers who used Bryant as a spokesmodel, specifically the Florida Citrus Commission. Gay bars around the country dumped Florida orange juice in favor of California brands, while civic and church leaders lined up to purchase it. Despite the fact that many churches remained silent on the issue, a large number of evangelical churches supported the anti-gay ballot measure. The People's Temple, on the other hand, came out strongly in favor of gay and lesbian Americans. Not only did the membership of the temple take up a donation for the Dade County Coalition formed to oppose Bryant's efforts in Florida, but Jim Jones also sat on the board of the San Francisco-based ad hoc committee to support the Dade County Coalition. In a lively display of pro-gay support, the People's Temple publicly endorsed the boycott. Gay activist Howard Wallace, who was the organizer of the ad hoc group supporting the boycott, addressed the predominantly black church, the People's Temple, and received a rousing ovation from several thousand attending when he asked their support in observing the boycott. The congregation voted to urge their followers to participate in the boycott through the article of the church newspaper, the People's Forum, which distributes 600,000 copies in the Bay Area weekly. Yes, black people, Anita Bryant's one of the greatest advocates for the family, and yes, black folks stupidly lined up behind LGBTQ and helped create their movement. We've done it over and over again. We have nothing to show for it. Yes, like killing babies, damn, we got a lot to repent for. And look at how the story ends. You all know they got murdered by these people. Same way certain folks are going to get vaccinated. The church congregation also voted with a standing cheering vote to write their friends and relatives in the Miami area and ask them to observe the boycott. In April 1977, Prokes read a statement from Jim Jones at the protests and the heavily gay Castro district to support the rights of gay men and lesbians living in Dade County. This vicious attack on the gay community by Anita Bryant is another sign in which the way the wind is blowing. It's coming from the right and it's getting stronger. This marriage of pseudo Christian morality and patriotism, backed up by corporate money, is giving birth to a new wave of fascism, and it's spreading its poison, attacking anything that's not straight white and conservative. I think we ought to take a good look around us and a good look around our communities, finding out who among us is trying to cause division. There goes that unity. Trying to tear down unity, trying to call names and sow hatred. We are entering a period where the rights of all minorities, I'm not a minority, are going to be under attack, even as we're attempting to emerge into full equality. There's a reactionary mood in middle America, and if the economic conditions worsen, as no doubt will happen, according to all the forecasts, we will be the scapegoats. We will be blamed. The poor people, blacks, browns, gays, disabled, everybody that doesn't fit into the right mold, because Anita Bryants are everywhere. The fight against the anti-gay hate campaign is not just a fight of the gay community, but of all people who are endangered by the fascist mentality that hides behind beauty contest queens, pseudo-religious revival, patriotic organizations, and the like. We all have a stake in this fight. I'm afraid if we don't get it together and present a united front and forget all the small differences, we will be in danger of a new wave of fascist-like repression in the coming years, a nightmare like that could mean the kind of insanity that we're seeing in various nations like Chile, Iran, and Argentina. Let our theme be solidarity, and let us build a coalition that will stand up to the reactionaries whenever and wherever they dare to oppress us. Prokes went on to make the gay press with his own speech, in which he said, if Anita Bryant prays to a God that recognizes her insidious campaign against gay people, I don't want any part of him or it. This kind of overt support from the gay community at a time when a number of religious groups were either leading the attack against gays or remaining silent was unparalleled in the non-gay religious community. It was this unwavering support for gays that earned the loyalty of a number of people in the city's gay community. Reporters from around the country contacted the People's Temple regarding or concerning its non-traditional support of gay people. In addition to Wallace, the Temple's political support for homosexuals also attracted the attention of gay teacher organizer Hank Wilson and the gay political leader Harvey Milk. The People's Temple did receive some support from some opposition to the Bryant campaign for defending the rights of gay men and lesbians in general. A letter to the People's Forum from the headquarters of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party drew connections between racism and bigotry against homosexuality. This comes from that trick named Elaine Brown that got a lot of Black Panthers killed. Listen to what it says. The Black Panther Party wishes to point out that shouting faggot while ruthlessly stabbing a gay human being several times closely parallels this country's historical pattern of shouting nigger while lynching, raping, or castrating a black victim. This is what the Black Panthers brought us. The whole human, multi-ethnic community, black and poor people, homosexual and heterosexual alike, are victimized by a climate of fear and violence created by the Anita Bryants and John Briggs, those ultimately disposable types acting as front men or puppets for the powerful conservative interests which seek to stop social change in all areas. They seek to open up a Pandora's box of hysteria and hatred to drive back the people's movement for human rights to live a decent and fulfilling life. This is the issue here. The human and civil rights of people, regardless of race or indeed sexual preference, to live out their lives free of bias and discrimination, free of racism and discrimination, in order to develop their full human potential. The hidden dangers and lies and the potential for violence created by Anita Bryant's crusade in Florida ought now to be clear to us all. Just as she used the Bible to whip up a national backlash on unfounded fears and open hostility against gay people, uh, so too was the Bible used for centuries to justify the enslavement of blacks. Bigoted, racist minds need not be pushed too hard, need not be encouraged to attack innocent victims. America has taught black people that lesson already. Intersectionality. Black Lives Matter comes straight out of the Black Panther Party. Sure it does. It has an interconnection. The Weathermen and that whole stuff. I'm not attacking the righteous Black Panthers, but Elaine Brown is the wicked one. The People's Temple also publicly endorsed gay marriages by supporting the effort of Anthony Sullivan and Richard Adams to have their relationship recognized by the federal government. On April 21st, 1975, Sullivan and Adams were legally married in Boulder, Colorado by gay deputy county clerk Patrick Prince after hearing that Prince had married a half-dozen same-sex couples over a month's time without any action taken to stop him. Armed with a coveted marriage license, Adams then petitioned the Immigration and Naturalization Service to let Sullivan, a citizen of Australia, be allowed to live in the U.S. as Adams' spouse. And the case was historically significant for gay people because it challenged both the definition of marriage as well as the 1965 law that banned immigration of homosexuals under the exclusion of the sexual deviant clause, which was not repealed until 1990. 1965, year I was born, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act. They began to just let everybody in the country to punish black people for the civil rights movement. Open your eyes, people. Already facing blistering hatred from the general public, Adams and Sullivan were still surprised by the level of bigotry from the INS, which responded to their petition by stating, "You have failed to establish that a bona fide marital relationship can exist between two faggots." Whoa. A further complication was that, according to the INS regulations, Adam and Sullivan had to declare their relationship had been consummated, an act that was illegal at the time. Fearing further public backlash, leaders in the gay community distanced themselves from the couple's efforts at federal recognition. The People's Temple, however, not only publicly supported the efforts of Adams and Sullivan, it made a generous donation to their defense fund. Adams and Sullivan's petitions were eventually denied after an extended battle with the federal government that spanned a decade and ended in the Supreme Court. The courts never nullified their marriage, but rather decided that the federal definition of marriage as being between a man and a woman overrode Colorado's marriage license. Richard Adams and Anthony Sullivan, who met in 1971, left the United States when their appeals were exhausted, moving to England and eventually settling in Australia. The gay community joined them in celebrating their 25th anniversary in 1996. Jim Jones used the temple support for gays and lesbians for his own political gains wherever he could, most notably to reinforce a relationship with presidential candidate Jimmy Carter. The relationship had been initiated by Carter's sister, Ruth Stapleton, who had become aware of Jones' faith healing services. In June 1976, Jimmy Carter's son Chip attended an annual fundraiser for the Guide Dogs for the Blind organization at the Mint Bar, a well-known gay establishment in San Francisco. The press ridiculed the future president's son, but Jones and the People's Temple were quick to support him. In a taped telephone conversation, Jones told Jimmy Carter's wife, Rosalind, "There's been some negative press about your son participating and raising funds for a gay bar, and I wanted to let you know that we're 100% behind you in that." While many political and religious leaders used the incident to attack Carter or remain silent on the issue altogether, the People's Temple again was on the forefront of publicly supporting gay and lesbian issues. An indication of the People's Temple's influence on gay and lesbian communities best illustrated by a letter sent to Jim Jones by gay community member Michael Delaney, who coincidentally represented the Harry S. Truman Democratic Club with Chip Carter at the Mint Bar fundraiser. As Delaney wrote, I just wanted you to know that I admire your good work here in San Francisco. Although I've never met you or even seen you, I feel as if I already knew you. As a gay man, I can sympathize with other minority groups more than ever. I too feel their oppression, the sting of bigotry, the dull oppression of ignorance, because you have vibrated and acted so righteously against the dark sea of ignorance and bigotry that pervades this world. I believe you fulfill the role of a 20th century prophet. All of this without even meeting Jim Jones. Delaney's reaction was not unique. After his first meeting at the People's Temple, gay teacher Hank Wilson went home and wrote down the name and numbers of 10 gay groups and and more than 40 gay and lesbian contact people who demonstrated a People's Temple consciousness, including well known gay figures Pat Norman, Tom Alamiano, Randy Alfred, and Randy Burns. Oh, everybody's Randy. Even the local African American paper, The Sun reporter, commented that on the support the temple enjoyed from the gay and lesbian community, gay leaders Harvey Milk and Harvey Wallace both voiced support for Jim Jones and the People's Temple. Wallace, head of Gay Action, told the congregation, the People's Temple has sent shockwaves through the gay community. Reverend Jones has set an example for everybody that believes in human rights. Great numbers of gay people are well aware of your stand, and we won't forget it. Despite its many pro-gay stances, the People's Temple's philosophical approach to gay men and lesbians was outright contradictory. For example, as a loyalty test to Jim Jones, Temple members signed letters confessing to a variety of crimes. Many of these members, the crime which they confessed was to be a homosexual. One Dear Dad letter recovered in the Jonestown confesses to the membership in the radical Symbionese army by a Jonestown resident who says he participated in bank robberies, kidnapping, and murder. The second letter speaks of raping a little girl, cutting up her body, and hiding it in the woods. Next to these two is a note from a man extolling the pleasures of gay sex with a new partner who fulfills all of his sexual needs. Any group that has its members admit or confess homosexuality could hardly be called gay affirming, even though the congregation identified collectively as gay and had a very pro-gay public persona. Jones clearly made a distinction by not identifying as gay himself. In this way, he separated from his congregation, holding heterosexuality as the highest standard and recognizing that being a gay man or lesbian was simply part of being human, but still framed as an impurity. Again, this is not a very affirming for gay people. Contrary to the popular myth that Harvey Milk's election was due to emerging gay political clout, Milk actually bucked the established gay leadership to launch his many campaigns. Political gay men and lesbians in the mid-70s accepted that they had no chance of being elected. Therefore, it was prudent to throw gay support, specifically large financial contributions, behind gay-friendly candidates rather than gay candidates themselves. Milk's abrasive East Coast style only served to further alienate low-key San Francisco gay leadership, finding himself at odds with gay leaders. Milk looked outside the gay community for support. He campaigned on a platform that was pro-people, that could draw diverse crowds. He championed poor people and for senior citizens of the community. He networked with senior groups and made historic inroads with the labor movement and initiated an alliance with the Chinese political organizations. Because Milk was instrumental in getting gay bars in San Francisco to join the labor sponsored boycott of Coors beers, a number of labor groups, including the Firemen's Union, the Teamsters, and the impressive Building and Construction Trade Council, all endorsed an openly gay man for elected office for the first time. With his broad outreach, the young populist Milk soon came to the attention of the politically astute Jim Jones. Contacting Milk in 1976, during Milk's unsuccessful bid for the state assembly seat, Jones offered to canvass the Hyatt Street area, despite the fact he'd already endorsed Milk's opponent, Art Agnos. No matter who won the election, Jones had made sure that the temple would be on the winning side. The temple's aide, Sharon Amos, was designated as the liaison between the temple and Milk, and the Milk campaign purchased a printing press for the surprisingly low sum of $200 from the temple to print its campaign literature. Milk's first stop to the People's Temple was a campaign stopover that turned personal. Milk must have felt newfound importance as he was in the company of a number of prominent San Francisco personalities. Listen to this, including Angela Davis and Art Agnos. When Milk returned home, he wrote a thank you note directly to Jim Jones, dated Sunday, March 22nd, 1976. Milk wrote that he was at the People's Temple to campaign, but while there, he found something more spiritual. He regretted having to leave the service early, despite being there for over 4 hours, but he felt a high after leaving the church. Moved by an entire congregation which shared his political views, as well as by the warm reception, Milk added, "The life of a politician is not one that gives you the chance to stay in a situation that you enjoy, for you must push on to other events. But I found something dear today. I found a sense of being that makes up for all the hours and energy placed in a fight. I found that you wanted me to find. I shall be back, for I can never leave." This reveals the true emotion, the high that many people felt after they left a temple service. The letter was very personal, and though written in a political context, it's an indicator that Harvey Milk had founded the People's Temple, and after years of a semi-religious life, had begun to feel real spiritual fulfillment at the Socialist Church. Whether motivated spiritually or for political gain or a combination of both, Harvey Milk returned many times to the People's Temple. In the April 2nd, 1976 edition of the People's Forum, Milk was listed among the number of prominent people in support of Dennis Banks, the embattled American Indian Movement member who had close ties to the People's Temple. In a letter dated April 27, 1976, Milk expressed his gratitude for being mentioned in the latest edition of the Temple newspaper. Milk also thanks Jones for the Temple's support of his campaign for state assembly, the success of which Milk feels incredibly optimistic. A photo of Milk speaking at the podium of the People's Temple also appeared on the cover of the August 1977 issue, along with a number of other San Francisco politicians who attended the service in support of Jim Jones and his church. Milk's next letter to Jones, dated December 12, 1976, comments on the new format of the People's Forum. It also laments the state of America and ponders if the political situation will ever get better. The letter then seems to move on to a more personal tone. Our paths have crossed, they will stay crossed. It is a fight I will walk into with you. Whenever I seem to get a little low, I seem to get a copy of the People's Forum. It gives me the strength to wake up and to realize that one cannot get tired. There's no time for that. I shall not get tired. Milk's relationship with the temple evolved over time, reflecting not only a political alliance but a spiritual connection. Milk gave the temple credit for his ability to continue his political fights and reaffirmed his solidarity with the progressive church. To drive a point home, Milk emphasized his support for Jim Jones and the People's Temple by pledging, "The first time I heard you, you made a statement. Take one of us, and you must take all of us. Please add my name." One of Milk's many accomplishments was the founding of the Castro Street Fair, originally an afternoon for local merchants to showcase their wares. Today, the Castro Street Fair has turned into a weekend celebration with artisans around the world that crowd and that numbers into the hundreds of thousands. Many people were critical of Milk's plan, accusing him of just trying to boost the local economy and in turn his little camera store on Castro Street. But Milk was determined to have a good showing, so in addition to food booths, artisan displays, and vending machines, Milk organized speeches from the central stage. For entertainment, he asked his friends from the People's Temple to come and perform. A troupe of the temple teens sang and danced for the overflow Castro crowd. A note sent to the church from Milk thanking the teens for their wonderful performance located in the temple archives. The last note, which Harvey Milk was known to have written to Jim Jones, comes in the spring of 1977. It refers to what must have been one of Jones' last speeches in San Francisco, and again has a more personal than political tone. "Jim, hearing your voice Sunday gave me a warm feeling. I am so glad that ear trouble has not lowered your ability to fight and to fight so greatly. My name is cut in stone in support of you and your people." Milk aide Danny Nicoletta accompanied Milk on his visit to the People's Temple. Nicoletta recalled seeing people that he identified as gay, an observation corroborated by gay temple member Vernon Gosney, who stated that the temple would have strategically placed gay people around Milk and his friends. Nicoletta confessed he was excited after the temple service, but that Milk warned him not to be taken in by the People's Temple. Nicoletta thought that Milk admired Jones, and he might have even looked to him as an equal, but he would have never been involved in Jones' persona-based church. Milk was a leader, not a follower. He may have been envious of Jones's leadership skills, but he was too clever or too egotistical to be taken in himself. Nicoletta recalled that when he went to use the restroom in the middle of the multi-hour service, a guard accompanied him. He had never been to a church with guards before, nor had he ever been escorted to the bathroom. To him, the whole experience felt creepy, but it did not draw away from his excitement about the overall trip to the church. As Milk and his group left, members of the temple security team walked into their car. This may be because the church was located in a tough neighborhood, and it would not have helped to have visiting dignitaries mugged on their way to or from the church. Not many people had a direct line to Harvey Milk. Reporter Bill Barnes of the San Francisco Examiner was one of them. Marceline and Jim Jones were two others. Nicoletta confirmed that Milk let calls from Jim or his wife, Marceline, be sent directly through to him. Nicoletta stared at the phone. Mostly came from Marceline Jones and usually involved upcoming temple events. According to Milk's biographer, Randy Schultz, when Milk aide Ann Cronenberg asked Harvey about the volunteers from the People's Temple, he responded, "They're weird but excellent volunteers. You take help where it comes from, but you don't trust them." This attitude of Milk towards the temple is reinforced in a Stitching a Revolution of former Milk staffer Cleve Jones. According to Jones, Milk was close enough to the People's Temple that when he wanted a good turnout for a press conference, he called the temple, and the church would send him a busload of people at the prearranged time. It was not clear how Milk contacted the temple for its members, but it must have been quite often, considering his reputation for drawing a large, diverse crowds. Cleve Jones Quote of Milk after the press conferences regarding the temple assistant is almost identical to Schultz. They were weird but excellent volunteers. You have to take help where you come from, but don't trust them. Ruling out plagiarism, the similarities of the comments could only indicate Milk's feeling about the People's Temple were emphatic and heartfelt, but the former temple member Gary Lambrev acknowledged that the underlying belief, I'm sure it was common knowledge among the San Francisco politicians of the era, particularly those supported by Jim Jones, that his followers were weird, i.e., not the supporters you would expect to follow the campaign trail, but rather poor, relatively uneducated who did what they were told. I'm talking about weak ass black people getting played. And they sure got played. Still, most politicians graciously accepted the temple volunteers, whether they were weird or not. Harvey Milk lost the 1976 California Assembly bid by a few thousand votes, a good showing for a virtually unknown candidate running against one of the most popular politicians from the San Francisco Bay Area. He could not have achieved such a feat were it not for the help of the People's Temple. Milk remained in politics, and in 1977, he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. With personal interest and support, Milk would shape the personal bonds and political connections with Jim Jones and the People's Temple until the end of their lives. Nowhere in Harvey Milk's archives, either at California Historical Society or the San Francisco Public Library, are these letters from the Temple's leadership responding to the supervisor's correspondence, though the library does house over 50 letters sent to Milk from residents of Jonestown when Milk's lover, Jack Lira, committed suicide in September of 1978. Temple members were prolific writers. It is difficult to believe that they would not have responded to any of Milk's letters, especially when he became more popular and politically influential. Traditionally, the Temple would have sent Milk prayer clothes, photos of Jones, and fundraising letters in addition to any specific responses to his letters. It is suspicious that none of these things appear in Milk's personal or private effects. Let me read some more of this. Y'all like this? I'm almost, let me see. Yeah, this is going to go fast. I'm almost done. I'm half done, y'all. I'm finish this. Listen to this. Gary Lambrev stayed in the temple until 76, but he grew increasingly concerned about the changes within the church, the spying, beatings, and overall paranoia that pervaded the church became too much for him to handle. As the temple grew, it morphed from a communal and utopian paradise in the lush Redwood Valley into a militant urban socialist outpost. Despite its numerous good works, the People's Temple faced another public relations crisis in 1977, reminiscent of the Lester Kinsolving articles 5 years earlier. Former members, considered traitors or defectors by the general temple membership, came forward with allegations against the church leadership, ranging from property theft, assault, fraud, child abuse, brainwashing, and even murder. People outside the temple who worked on campaigns that had lost to political candidates and issues endorsed by Jim Jones seized on this opportunity to discredit the progressive church. No one escaped the wrath of meetings. In January 1976, Gary was called up before the congregation on the pretext of suspected sexual liaison with Alan Swanson. But there was a problem. Yes, they were both gay, good friends and roommates, but even no one in the temple believed them that they had not had sex. Neither of the accused men offered a defense for fear of receiving a beating, but the confrontation left Gary feeling more angry than humiliated. He was profoundly confused until he had every reason to believe in Jones's paranormal gifts. Now he saw that Jones, the man he thought was a living God, could be wrong. And Jones was wrong about him, and Alvin having a sexual relationship. What else could be wrong about? And if he doubted Jones, what did that mean about the temple itself? Still, it wasn't easy for him to leave. He had found peace and was comfortable in his busy routine, surrounded by friends and family devoted to a common cause. In August 1976, Gary tried to convince his closest friend, Liz Foreman, to return to the temple. Liz, the daughter of Julius Epstein, a movie director blacklisted during the McCarthy years, had recently defected from the group and was hiding across the bay. Gary's attempt to get her to return to the temple backfired. She talked him into leaving. As they compared notes, they realized that Jim Jones was more human than God, and the violent discipline of the church was only getting worse. A number of incidents led them to question involving the direction of the church. The first incident was the humiliation of a young woman in the temple who was ordered to stand before the planning commission and stripped of her clothing as Jones and other members ridiculed her. Unlike other punishments in the temple, the purpose of the act seemed nothing like more than humiliation and embarrassment, as the woman who had not done anything to warrant such cruel treatment. In fact, she was one of Jones' most loyal and dedicated followers. The temple leadership had even overseen a severe beating of Peter Wotherspoon, a close friend of Alan, Gary, and Liz. Peter was a pedophile who had been caught molesting temple boys and girls. So white man raping black babies, the black people continued to go to the church. The People's Temple, Jim Jones was a pedophile. Jim Jones was bisexual. These are the people that Angela Davis, the Panthers, the Weathermen and the people that helped create Black Lives Matter. Nancy Pelosi worked with Congressman Byrd. Maxine Waters worked with Congressman Damali. All worked with the People's Temple. The leadership that we're about to see a showdown in the next few days in this country is all connected to the People's Temple, y'all. Let me keep reading. Jones did not want to call the authorities. Jim Jones wanted to cover up for the molestation, okay? Did not want to call the authorities and felt the best way to handle the situation was to beat Peter so severely he'd never think of touching another boy again. Peter was beaten until he passed out and was resuscitated and then beaten unconsciously again. Even by temple standards, it was a brutal beating. Analyzing it as much like Linda Myrtle's beating, many temple historians have written that Peter was beaten for being gay. Well, why the hell? Beat for being a pedophile. Upon close inspection, it is clear this is not the case. The temple leadership struggled with the appropriate punishment, including turning over Peter to the police after they tried to find Peter a suitable male companion. But Peter had no interest in a relationship with an adult gay male. He preferred to stay with his wife, Mary. Although Gary knew that Peter had molested the children, they felt the punishment was too severe. After all, he's only raping black kids. Later, they killed black kids. If pedophilia is a sickness, was it appropriate to beat a sick person? How was this helping Peter? Was there other, less violent ways to ensure the safety of the temple's children? These questions were not asked, much less answered, in the mob mentality that led to the violent frenzy surrounding Peter's beating. For Gary, though, the incident was enough to convince him that it was time to leave. In the company of Liz Foreman, Gary arrived late one night at a Relics and Things to quickly gather a few of his possessions, while everyone in this tiny commune was groggy with sleep. They had to turn on the light in order to pack his bags. The disturbance aroused the manager, Bev Livingston, who had placed the call to the central headquarters a mile away. As Gary and Liz pulled away, they saw Jim Jones' adopted Aisha's son, Lou, and the top temple lieutenant, Maria Casares, drive up. After a citywide chase that lasted the better part of an hour, Liz and Gary lost their pursuers between San Francisco's Chinatown and North Beach. Once Gary got settled in his hiding place, he called the temple to arrange the picking up of the rest of his things. Jim Jones got on the phone and used the carrot and stick to convince him to stay with the church. After a prolonged argument, Gary told Jones he no longer felt Jim Jones was God, and that if he were God, he was misusing his power. He could not get around the fact that Jim had accused him of acts he had never done, nor could he find the justification for the brutal treatment of Linda and Peter and the humiliation of the young woman. The magic was gone. There was no going back. In the final act of power, he hung up on Jim Jones, symbolically cutting the ties with his God forever. As he arranged to do, Gary contacted the people a half hour before retrieving his remaining personal effects. He was met at the store by a temple security team led by Jim Elvain, a large man who stood 6 feet 7 inches tall. He handed Gary his locker box, now unlocked, of course, a jumble of papers obviously searched. His personal writings were intact, but his passport and community college teaching credential were gone. Whatever Alan Swanson had a problem with the direction of the temple, he thought it was just him and he was being self-indulgent, but the discipline had been too severe. Once he saw a woman's hands tied behind her back and she was thrown into the temple swimming pool, which was often used for mass baptisms, Alan realized the woman was in real danger of dying, if not from drowning, then from the sheer panic. He did not want to have a similar experience and felt for the first time he did not want to be a part of the discipline. It was becoming too much for him. Alan got a call from an old friend in San Francisco who had just driven to Ukiah. Alan knew that he was supposed to hang around only with members from the temple, but he really enjoyed his friend's time and decided it would not be too bad to go to a movie. As they were waiting in line, Alan noticed a group of temple members, including an associate pastor, Jack Beam, further up the line. Alan could not believe his eyes. He thought that temple insiders, the most pious in the group, would flaunt temple rules was shocking to him. He began to wonder how the group of temple members could go to the movies together and not worry about any of the others reporting the trip. How often did they do it? And where did they get the money from for the tickets? Like many other members of the People's Temple, Alan had a life outside the group, but he never expected that other people did too, especially people from the leadership positions who are supposed to set the example. Alan tried to process all these emotions. He was becoming disillusioned with the church and was not sure what to do about it. When he and Gary Lamberth called and confronted their non-existent relationship, Alvin had doubts about Jones being the living God. Ever since the incident with the whiskey bottle, he knew it was only a matter of time before he would leave the temple. When his mother in Wisconsin became sick, he got permission to return home to take care of her. While there, he received a number of letters from temple members offering words of encouragement and support. Alvin stayed home longer than expected, and his feelings about leaving the temple changed from time to time. Alvin also made plans to return to Ukiah. Gary called on him to tell him that their friend Liz Foreman had left the church. Gary explained to Allen that he was going to call Liz to persuade her to return to the temple and was wondering if Allen had heard from her. Allen replied he had not and had asked Gary to keep him posted. A few nights later, Gary and Liz called Allen to tell him that Gary also left the church. They also told him that Allen about the beating of their friend Peter Witherspoon. Two friends now want to convince Allen either to remain in Wisconsin or to stay with them in Ukiah, but by no means return to the People's Temple. Allen decided to return to Ukiah, but Gary and Liz met him at the airport and took him where they were hiding. During the weekend, when they knew most of the temple members would be in San Francisco or Los Angeles, Allen and Gary snuck back into the commune where Allen had left his things during his time in Wisconsin. They entered the residence to find all of Allen's possessions had been removed. Most likely, someone from the temple had called Allen's home in Wisconsin and found out he already left, and they removed everything he owned from the commune. The two men went to the lot where the buses and cars were kept. The buses were gone, of course, but Allen's car was still there. Usually, temple members turned the title of their cars over to the temple. The members were allowed to use the cars, but the temple actually owned them. Once they turned in their car's title, the members could have their cars repaired or tuned up at the temple's machine shop. But Allen never surrendered his title. Gary and Allen opened the gate, and Allen used his spare key to repossess his car. One of the most influential people to defect from the People's Temple was Grace Stoen, wife of then San Francisco Assistant District Attorney Tim Stoen. The Stoens had been members of the temple inner circle since the early 70s. Complicating this defection of a top lieutenant was the issue of the paternity of Grace Stoen's son, John Victor Stoen. Both Stoens had signed a sworn affidavit attributing paternity to Jim Jones. However, the credibility of the statements was questionable, as temple members often signed false affidavits as loyalty tests. At the same time, Grace Stoen never denied having a sexual relationship with Jim Jones prior to conception, nor was Jim Jones known to have had other people sign similar paternity documents. Almost a year after Grace's defection in July 1976, Tim also left the church and immediately joined his estranged wife in her attempt to retrieve the child that they left in Jones's custody. In addition to the potentially embarrassing paternity suit, a member of the news articles appeared examining the temple's role in the 1976 San Francisco elections with allegations of voter registration fraud and theft. On August 1st, 1977, the New West magazine published an article in which 10 temple defectors sold their stories on what went on inside the People's Temple. Adding spice to the publication was the claim by the New West editors that the temple's members had broken into their offices in an attempt to discover the contents of the upcoming expose to intimidate the magazine into canceling the story. They notified the police. The only thing that in their office that had been disturbed was a folder in the People's Temple. From the start of the investigation, though, the police questioned the veracity of the alleged break-in and determined that the New West employee had broken in after having locked himself out of the building earlier in the week. With this information, the report of the tampered temple file was seen to be wishful thinking. However, the magazine editors never retracted the allegation, and the negative press associated with the break-in, coupled with the pending paternity suit, convinced Jones to send a 5-year-old Victor Stoen to Jonestown, beyond the reach of the American judicial system. The temple began to accelerate the migration of its members to its agricultural mission in Jonestown, culminating in a mass exodus of almost 1,000 people to a remote jungle outpost by the fall of 1977, leaving only a few hundred members in San Francisco and Ukiah to manage the stateside financial and business affairs. Jones himself arrived in Jonestown August 1977, never again to leave the community bearing his name. The temple leadership had responded to the negative press of the summer of 1977 by asking a number of prominent politicians to rally to their cause. In his defense of the People's Temple, Harvey Milk wrote to the New West, stating that Jones possesses as much integrity as anyone I've met. Milk joined other well-known politicians, including California Lieutenant Governor Mervyn DeMalley. This was Maxine Waters' boss, people. And San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and State Assemblyman Willie Brown. And writing to Forbes Burnham, the Prime Minister of Guyana, in support of the People's Temple. Milk's letter of August 5th, 1977, goes to great lengths to defend the church, albeit in a somewhat rambling way. The good I see, the good I hear, the work that the People's Temple does for my community, and the good that the People's Temple does for other communities like mine, at every aspect must be considered communities that have been passed over by so-called democracy. If any other churches believed in Christianity like the People's Temple does, if other people believed in democracy like the People's Temple does, then mankind in this nation would not be in the everlasting struggle it finds itself in. Milks concludes his letter with unequivocal support for both the works of the People's Temple. When those who do good are pointed at, let it be pointed at for the good that they do. If that happens, more people will be pointed at the People's Temple than other churches in my community. Giving credence to the report of an organized effort coordinated by the Temple, Howard Wallace's letter of support to Burnham was written on the same day as Milk. The Temple quoted Wallace's letter and a widely circulated promotional flyer. The People's Temple are now the object of right-wing attacks because they practice what they preach, solidarity with the oppressed and the exploited of the earth. The Temple is consistent on behalf of the democratic rights against the social and economic inequality that is without parallel even in San Francisco, the historical center of progressive movements. I am one of the many thousands in this city who take pride in counting Jim Jones and the People's Temple among my friends. The battle lines have been drawn. The People's Temple and their prominent supporters on the one side, and the former Temple members, including Tim and Grace Stoen, Linda Myrtle's parents, and who now call themselves Jenny and Al Mills, and several relatives of Jonestown residents such as Stephen Katsaris, the father of Jones' confidant Maria Katsaris, were on the other. The relatives formed a group that came to be known Concerned Relatives. They began to circulate petitions and organize press conferences to hold protests in front of the Temple's headquarters. After a flurry of media stories concerning the New West article, the Temple's high-profile responses, the two sides found themselves at an impasse. The Concerned Relatives groups had no contact with the residents of Jonestown, much less the ability to retrieve their family members who lived there, whereas Jones found that he could not return from Guyana for fear of being arrested on charges of kidnapping John Victor Stoen. The Concerned Relatives modified their strategy and began to file numerous complaints against the Temple with various government agencies. One of the allegations the relatives charged that $40,000 to $60,000 of Social Security checks were deposited every month into the church's coffers, while the intended recipients of the checks received inadequate food and care. Isn't it amazing how black folk can give up their money to people that treat them like this, but you can't get us to work together? Damn. They'll let a rapist, an abuser, a liar, a druggie, and they'll take the vaccine too. Same kind. Can't save these people, y'all. The Temple once again mobilized its high-profile supporters to come to its aid. Harvey Milk willingly complied. On December 20th, 1977, after having been elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, but before he took office, Milk wrote a letter on his campaign stationery to Joseph Califano, the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. As he had before, Milk praised the work of the People's Temple while the church was based in San Francisco. In this light, it seems outrageous that a group that has done so much for the elderly, minority, and disadvantaged citizens is now deprived of its elderly members' rights to receive benefits which they've earned through entire lifetimes of hard work. Equally notable is that the People's Temple has been the first to defend the constitutional rights of others when they have been threatened. But now it appears that the First Amendment, the right of religious freedom, is being thrown into jeopardy. It is unthinkable that religious preference should include a fine and industrious members of the People's Temple from receiving Social Security. Among the documents recovered in Jonestown after November 1978 was the HEW response assuring Milk that all American citizens in Guyana, including members of the People's Temple, were receiving their payments regularly. A scrub note in the margins reads, send to PT, former Milk aide Daniel Nicoletta confirmed that the scribble was in Milk's handwriting. The concerned relatives received a big boost with the defection of top Temple financial assistant Debbie Layton Blakey on May 13, 1978, leaving her mother, brother, and husband in Jonestown. Blakey exacerbated her betrayal in the Temple's eyes by submitting an affidavit that provided ammunition in support of the allegations made by the concerned relatives. Blakey stated that Jonestown was nothing more than a concentration camp where the people worked long hours under armed guards with little food. 5 months after Blakey deserted the group, the Temple leadership was rocked with yet another high-level defection. Terry Buford, who had worked with Blakey on the Temple's finances, left Guyana on October 27, 1978. Armed with Blakey's affidavit, the concerned relatives asked California Representative Leo Ryan to investigate the conditions at Jonestown. A longtime friend of the congressman, Bob Houston Sr., asked Ryan to investigate the rumors that his son, a People's Temple member, was killed as he was preparing to leave the temple. His son's 2 daughters had moved to Jonestown, and the senior Houston wanted to make sure that they were not being held against their will. When Ryan read Blakey's affidavit, he began planning a trip to Guyana and judged Jonestown for himself. Responding to both the concerned relatives who were contacting members of Congress with their complaints about the People's Temple and to Grace Thorne's attempt to retrieve her child, the church asked its celebrity supporters, listen to this, y'all. They asked their supporters, Willie Brown, Angela Davis, and Jane Fonda, to write Jimmy Carter to ask him to intervene on the Temple's behalf. Again, Harvey Milk participated with a letter dated February 19th, 1978. This time on official city letterhead. The letter is somewhat disturbing that it reads as if it were written by a Temple publicist. Milk argues for Jones' paternity of John Victor Stone. The supervisor refers to the unreliable declaration signed by Tim Stone as irrefutable proof. The most widely read columnist in the area, Herb Kahn, printed Mr. Stone's sworn testimony that John is not his child, but rather Jim Jones. Milk even goes as far to ask Carter to take action against Tim Stone for warning the whole situation could embarrass the State Department and jeopardize the international relationship with Guyana. In reviewing this letter in more recent years, Mark aide Daniel Nicola expressed concern that he did not read it as though it had come from his former boss and friend. Indeed, the letter to President Carter is very different from the rambling letter that Milk wrote to the Prime Minister of Guyana almost 6 months earlier. The difference between the letters may be explained by a memo within the Jonestown files concerning a similar letter to Carter, signed by State Assemblyman Willie Brown. The memo states that Brown would change the wording of the People's draft Temple letter to the president if the Temple Ghost wrote both letters and presumably others in Milk accepted the language without making changes. It would account for the different tone between the supervisor's letters to Carter and to Burnham. Let me see how much more. Am I almost done? I'm going to stop in a second. I just want y'all to, let me see, how much more do I got to do? It's 50. I might be able to do this. I wonder if I want to do this. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go to, I'm in chapter 5. Let me make certain. I skipped a couple of pages, y'all, because it wasn't as interesting. I'm in chapter 6. So I've read chapters 4 and 5 for the most part. Chapter 6, Jonestown, Guyana. When the People's Temple relocated its headquarters from Ukiah to San Francisco, Vernon Gosney, his son Mark, and Mark's surrogate mother, Edith Cordell, joined the move. Edith and Mark settled into an apartment on Sutter Street, and Vernon moved into an apartment house on Potrero Hill. This is where OJ lived, where 19 kids and 6 adults lived communally. Potrero Hill commune was for troubled children, children with learning or behavioral problems, and those considered misfits, even on the fringe for the temple. Edith took care of a number of the temple children, including children with severe physical disabilities, and Vernon got a temple-sanctioned job in the law offices of Fred Firth. During this time, Lois Punch took refuge at the Potrero Street Commune, a nurse from Ukiah. Lois reportedly got in trouble in the job because she was caught stealing drugs for Jim Jones. Lois and Vernon soon began to conflict, leading to a confrontation in which Lois accused Vernon of molesting the children in his care. Vernon did not know if Lois was intentionally being malicious or if she simply felt gay men should not be around children. More gays. Wow. Either way, it was very anti-gay and hate-filled experience. Initially, temple leaders told Vernon to give up the children in his care until the issue was resolved, but Toby Stone insisted that her son, Tracy, stay with Vernon. Toby saw through the charges and refused to go along with the anti-gay witch hunt. At a time when Vernon felt his credibility was on the line, he was not sure if he could convince people that there was no truth to the charges. Toby had come out unequivocally behind him. When Vernon moved to Sutter Street Commune with Mark and Edith, Tracy moved in with him. Many of the People's Temple had already immigrated to Guyana, and Vernon had begun to experiment with drugs, decided that the only way to stay clean was to join 1,000 of his comrades in the jungle community. So on March 19, 1979, on Vernon's 25th birthday, when Edith Cordell and other members of the Sutter Street home left for Jonestown, Vernon and Mark went with them. While in Jonestown, Vernon worked as a laborer in the fields, and Edith assisted in taking care of both elders and children of the community. She would also give haircuts to anyone who asked. Secretly transporting over 1,000 people from San Francisco was a matter of months and had been a monumental organizational task. When the temple members learned that they were selected to go to Guyana, they got passports, quit jobs, and said goodbye to pets, friends, and families. Oftentimes, members would write their relatives and say that they were going to their church mission for a short trip with no specific date of return. Those chosen to go to the promised land were moved into one of 20 communal-style homes Always had a small bag for personal items packed, ready to go, and for the call to go to Jonestown. Sometimes the wait was a matter of days, sometimes weeks. When the date arrived for their departure, members of the leadership would show up to monitor the phone so people did not place any calls to non members. The commune members were then driven to the temple's building on Gary Street, where the final arrangements were made. The typical temple organization style, various tables were set up around the main dining room to facilitate the mass move. Staff with people to help with any legal or passport problems, to notify Social Security Administration or people's employers, and to handle medical or financial questions, and at a freak-out table to help people with last-minute anxieties. When all the paperwork was complete, temple members were often bused to other cities, flown to South America via New York or Miami. Initially, the temple denied published reports that it was abandoning its San Francisco headquarters, but it soon became obvious that the temple members were leaving the city for Guyana. Reporters found vacant apartments which had found vacant apartments where once had been bustling temple communes. The baseball team for the Opportunity High School, an experimental high school for troubled and disadvantaged youth, lost 13 players, all People's Temple, over the summer of 1977. The People's Temple Agricultural Project, as Jonestown was formerly known, carved out of the thick jungle of Guyana. Beginning in the fall of 1973, a handful of temple members, known as pioneers, built housing, a central pavilion, schools, a nursery, a laundry facility, and a radio room. They started a number of industries and sustained themselves on native fruits and local fishing. After the main influx during the 1977, hundreds of temple members called Jonestown home, but the community never became fully self-sufficient, relying on shipments of supplies from its San Francisco headquarters. The small community needed everything to survive: hardware, houseware, machinery, laundry appliances, school supplies, clothes, food, supplements, medicines, and parts for repairs. Everything from nails to blankets was sent to Guyana, the Guyana outpost, from the Gary Street Church. Jonestown created an egalitarian community free of class, race, or gender biases. Truly interracial communities, most of the members were either black or white, but there were a handful of Latino, Asian, and Native American people living in Jonestown. It anticipated becoming a self-sustaining community that would produce extra fruit and vegetables to sell or trade. Politically, it was a challenging rejection of American society and more. Through their migration to Jonestown, a group of Americans had publicly disavowed the values of the American government at the height of the Cold War and was trying to impose on the rest of the world. According to Jonestown philosophy, capitalism and a democracy were contradictory and could only clash. True democracy could only be realized through utopian socialism. Through the People's Temple, the created its own society in the jungle of Guyana. It was always with an eye to move to a more established socialist country like Cuba or the Soviet Union. As Tobin Stone explained, the reasons that Jones chose Guyana were many. The main language, the official one, English. Like his congregation, most of the population was black. The country was relatively close to home, making transportation of people and goods less expensive than it would be to Africa. The new government for Guyana had achieved its independence in 1966, was socialist, though not strictly Marxist. Finally, the country was poor, and it would be cheap to live in. The Guyana government accredited the Jonestown School, and in cases of emergencies, locals of the Amerindian population would seek out medical treatment at the Jonestown Medical Clinic. The community pumped its own water and used the electric generator for lighting system at night. The temple members joined the Guyanese political groups such as the Women's Revolutionary Social Movement, and they marched in May Day parades. The People's Temple used the agricultural outpost as a public relations tool with the socialist government of Guyana in a number of ways. The Jonestown Express, the committee's jazz and funk band, gave free concerts at political rallies in Georgetown. The Temple basketball team went to Georgetown in mid November 1978 to play the Guyanese national team. The Temple had also scheduled a year end event in Georgetown, which would have showcased the talents beyond the Jonestown Express, as well as cottage industry products and socialist display of songs, dance, and political speeches. A few weeks before the basketball tournament with the Guyana, the national team, Jim Jones offered some coaching advice, telling unidentified members of the team and a Jonestown meeting to show good sportsmanship by clapping when the other team scores, hugging their opponents between periods. Jones, this is what he said, you can look stern on the floor. You can look sure of yourself and be aggressive but be humble, and grab them between the recesses and hug them before they leave. They don't know how to deal with it. This is the response of a young man. I don't know if they'll let you do it. I sure as hell try. I've tried before. I've been treated like some kind of fag, like I'm not going to the locker room with him. Jim Jones, well, shake hands with them. Male, I've always played that way. I believe in breaking down. Jones, shake hands. I agree with you. I can see some idiot misinterpreting. Shake hands with them. If they don't want to shake hands, it will make them look like assholes to all the people watching. Jones does not correct the youth for saying the term fag, even though he would correct a person over the smallest details. Even more telling that what he would categorize a person who he thought was a sportsman-like hug was a reason to mistreat other players, an idiot for misinterpreting. In a small but interesting twist, the group that identified collectively as gay did not want to be perceived as a bunch of fags. Gay relationships flourished in the community, even though people were written up for unauthorized sex and public displays of gay-like flamboyance were discouraged in the Jonestown community. Vernon Gosney, who was scheduled to perform in the upcoming Temple variety show in Georgetown, witnessed this. Sharon Amos, the head of the Temple's Georgetown office, felt that Vernon was a bit too swishy to represent the community in the show. Vernon was told in no uncertain terms that he was not to be a part in the pageant and was unceremoniously dumped from the performance. Again, we experience a dichotomy between that identified internally as being gay, but did not want to be publicly perceived as being gay, more importantly, as being weak. Gayness in men, whether outward affection or towards other men and overt homosexual appearance, was discouraged because of the perceptions of them as weak. On the other hand, strong women were portrayed as lesbians, and open lesbians were able to play important roles. Here goes this double standard I'm telling you about black women. So the butches were free. That's amazing how this dichotomy. It's all, one is good, one's bad. Okay, all right. They were able to play. So they had some butch black women, some Stacey Abrams type folks running things. Open lesbians were able to play important roles within the temple's internal structure. Indeed, Jones is quoted as saying women should become Amazon warriors, going berserk at the sight of men, overriding all other considerations, though the temple did not want to offend the sensibilities of others, especially the Guyanese hosts. This is a classic example of a traditional, internalized homophobia, the closet mentality, where people tone down their gayness so that they will not be mistreated, disliked, or discriminated against. The lush jungle environment inarguably offered a healthy alternative to the life of urban ghettos, but the surrounding jungle served as a barrier from the outside world. Many Jonestown residents looked at their community as a last refuge against racism and rampant greed. They felt the jungle was protective. Others, overcome by isolation of the community, had a different view of the jungle. To them, it was as oppressive as any impenetrable wall, keeping them in and civilization out. Although most Jonestown residents experienced both sentiments at different times, Vernon Gosney hated the jungle community. He knew he had made a mistake the minute he set foot in Jonestown. The arrival of new members complicated Jonestown's continuity, and the conditions of the community worsened. The quickened pace of the exodus meant that there was little time to orient new arrivals before more fresh faces came. Despite the pace of the construction crew, the housing was insufficient to accommodate the new arrivals. Cottages that were literally built for 4 people had bunk beds installed, doubling the occupancy, and then those people doubled up again. What was limited space for 4 people became confining quarters for 16. There was no privacy, and oftentimes people changed clothes outside in the open because there was too little room to move about in the cabin. Daily life was regimented for no other reason than orderly organization. Meals were served in shifts, beginning with day laborers, followed by the able-bodied adults and seniors, and lastly the children. This would be repeated for lunch and dinner. Laborers who were going to be far away to return were given brown bag lunches. It was an intense organizational effort just to provide the daily needs of a community of 1,000 people, not to mention the operation of the baby nursery, schools, a clinic, sawmill, and other industrial labors, fishing endeavors, and working a farm, as well as maintaining a communication supply and shipments to and from San Francisco. I want to read a different section. In a letter written to Jones, Loretta Cordell Comer exhibits an acute awareness of racism, of the privilege that came with her white skin. She noticed the difficulty black women had in getting others to respect their authority. She confessed her attraction to strong black women and displayed feelings of solidarity and admiration for them. Loretta also felt the clothing distribution system at Jonestown was deficient. It seemed unfair to her that some people owned suitcases of clothes while others had only a few items. I want to do this one. Cynthia Davis quickly became acclimated to the difficult life in Jonestown. She enjoyed working on the cassava field crew and on the temple boat, going to various parts of the country to pick up supplies and bring them to the secluded community. Though she was not afraid of hard work, she found the pace challenging. Cynthia was one of the many Jonestown residents interviewed by Dick Trop, who was working on a book about the People's Temple and the Jonestown community. Through this interview, we're given insight to Cynthia's perceptions on relationships. Listen to this, y'all. Lesbianism and her ongoing relationship with the man, and the power dynamics between men and women. Although the temple themes such as communism, abandoning relationships, and challenges to sexist mores appear throughout the interview, it still offers Cynthia's unique perspective as a religious African American lesbian on these issues. See, I didn't hear all this about Jonestown, and this mess is going on. I'm going to skip. I want to do one of the last chapters because I'm almost done with this. I just want y'all to hear this. Let me see. Should I do some more of this? I'm going to take a pause in a second. On November 27th, 1978, Dan White, a former member of the San Francisco City Supervisor, entered City Hall through a basement window and went to the mayor's office and killed Mayor George Moscone. He then proceeded to the supervisor's office where he shot and killed Supervisor Harvey Milk. San Franciscans were reeling from the news that was coming out of Guyana, reports and hopes that hundreds of residents tried to save themselves by running into the jungle turned out to be unfounded. The total number of dead continued to climb, eventually surpassing the 900 mark. Because of the proximity to Jonestown tragedy and political connection between the two slain political figures, Jim Jones, there was an immediate speculation of a rumor that a Temple hit squad called the Angels was involved in the City Hall murders. However, Dan White soon turned himself in to the police after resigning from the board of supervisors. White had changed his mind and requested a reappointment. Milk had successfully lobbied Moscone to turn down the request. The subsequent murders were the result of rage. Milk's murder elevated him to the status of a martyr to the gay community, which immediately began with sabotage in the wake of Jonestown, which means his relationship with the People's Temple. Rumors immediately surfaced that Milk was angry with the temple for using his name for promotional materials after the bad press of the New West article appeared over a year before his murder. Another report claimed that Milk was closely monitoring the Leo Ryan trip and was going to reevaluate his support for the People's Temple if the trip had validated any of the claims of abuse or malnutrition. Though Milk may have very well distanced himself from the People's Temple after the Ryan visit, he gave no indication that he was ever considering such a move. Milk made no public comments in the aftermath of the Ryan murder and the Jonestown tragedy that he had any intentions of renouncing his loyalty to Jim Jones or the People's Temple. Other rumors turned out to be without foundation. Milk's letters uncovered at the California Historical Society refuted the claim that Harvey Milk was displayed by the temple's use of his name in promotional flyers. To the contrary, letters indicate an open and mutually supportive relationship between Milk and the People's Temple right up to mid-1978, and the temple continued to use Milk's name in its promotional materials from 1977 through 1978, along with city supervisor Carol Ruth Silver and 75 other prominent San Franciscans. Milk was listed as a temple supporter and endorser of the temple benefit and support dinner, which was to have been held in December 1978. California State Assemblyman Willie Brown was to have been the master of ceremonies. Milk had a simple time and opportunity to publicize his concerns about the temple's use of his name if he had had any. These concerns have been recorded somewhere, certainly would have been recalled by Milk staffer Dan Nicoletta. I'm going to stop there. It's a short book, but the same LGBTQ movement that claims to be the friends of black people, these people said nothing with pedophilia, child abuse, hurt, destruction, so forth. Okay, this is real talk. And it's the same thing. And do we see anything? Having endorsed this movement, what do we have to show for this? Yes, the CIA was involved. Other people were involved. This was a psyop. They used the psyop and social engineering to kill those black people. And we've not been told the truth about it. Um, I did 2 hours. I think my eyes need to rest because I think I have this screen very bright. Um, I'm going to pick back up in a little. But let me just, if you check the notes, let me share with you some of the books that I'm going to go through over the course of today. Periodically, just I'll be putting out announcements. Um, I've got a total of, I'm glad I did that one. At least I killed one. I've got 5. I've got a total of 10 books I want to mow through today. And they're all good. They're all great reading. I'm going to give myself exactly a few hours and then I'm going to come back maybe around 1 o'clock. Or if not 1, definitely by 1:32. And I'm also going to see if I can get some interviews in for this thing in Delaware. How y'all feeling? Did y'all enjoy that read? Was it worth it? Isn't it amazing how they use this LGBTQ thing to murder, and the CIA? And by the way, these are all Democratic Party people that let these black people be murdered. And the black LGBT, as long as you accept my sexuality, I can ignore the cult, the beating, all this stuff. And they use, it's insane. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to come back. I've got a bunch of these, but I need to like throw back for a second. So I'll simply send out another notice. I'm glad y'all learned something. They've never explained this Jonestown as, and they used the black people to legitimize the gay movement. And then when they were killing us, nobody cared. Same way the Democrats are doing us now, the same thing with the vaccines. When are we going to open our minds, think about ourselves? I'm glad we did that. Man, I got some good ones. So I'm going to take a break. Maybe I should do something. Should I do a little more? I feel like, can I do a chapter? Can I like kill one of these things? There's this black lady in here I want to talk about, August. Actually, I think I can do this one. This is 121 to, this is like a short chapter. Yeah, I could kill this. But that's, we've already done gay people. I want to do something different. You get tired of that shit. Let's do some black stuff. If I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do some black shit. Can I do some black shit, y'all? A black book. I'm gonna do this one. We charge genocide. At least I'm gonna start it. How y'all like that? I gotta do something black after this, cause that shit wore my spirit out reading that. Damn. They killed 400 kids. Oh, that made me tired. Wow, I was energized that, oh wow, that's evil. Forgive me, y'all. And I was psyched. I thought to tell you that sometimes this stuff mess with you. I got put this. This is the last time I'm gonna read this book for a long time. That thing was awful. That's awful. That's a terrible way to go. We gotta look out for our babies, man. Wow. And we're still now they're adopting babies and doing stuff. Let me pick something that will fire me back up because that shit depressed me. Lord, let me do something else. Let me do some black shit. Okay. Okay, is it okay if I do black stuff? I gotta do something black. I gotta deal with some racism, something. Is this sex thing? I gotta break. I need to break from sex. I gotta get out of sex. I won't do race. Let me see if I can do 30 minutes of race. Okay, let's see. Let's... Okay, let me see. Opening statement. Oh yes. Okay. I'm gonna do this in pieces, but I'm gonna do some of this. Okay. I'm gonna let's see if I can do some of this. Okay. We charge genocide. Let's get to this. Let's, because that's what happened in Jonestown. We charge genocide. It's edited by William Patterson. If you check the YouTube announcement, I put the information there so you don't have to ask me questions. If you read, if you take some time. Um, yeah, I'm going to play the race card. I'm going to put this up for people that don't read because it's a lot of me. And yes, it's, forgive me, it's ignorant. If I took the time to type it up, why don't you read it? I'm serious, it's ignorant. I want to read this. This is a book it's edited. One of the greatest black people you haven't heard of. I'm going to put this up. Here we go. Don't forget to drop me a piece. Y'all know how. And for you folk in YouTube, y'all should send me something. Y'all can send me $1 or $2. It's interesting. The people that do it through the stream, they hook you up. The people that come through YouTube, they're stingy. I don't know what that's about. Yeah, my announcement's not going to come through the chat. If you go through YouTube, you can't see it. If you go to the stream, you can. It's a choice. So here it is. We charge genocide. You choose. You want to go to YouTube instead of going to the stream. It's not going to be the same way for right now. This just doesn't do it that way. Sorry. I'm doing a simultaneous stream off of YouTube. I'm doing it through this. And let me see. After and a day or so, I'll be on Facebook and I'll be able to do a multiplicity of these. And it'll go all over the place. So it's there. Let's get here. Man. Oh, I don't want to read that. That thing just pissed me off. I can't read that. They had that bad word in there. So here we go. I'm going to start off with the second preface. Here we go, y'all. This is the preface to the second edition by Ossie Davis. I absolutely got to see him a few days before he died. Wow. This is not the first time that the people of the United States have issued a warning. W.B. Du Bois said it plain in 1900. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. We say it again, now we will submit no further to the brutal indignities being practiced against us. We will not be intimidated and most certainly not eliminated. We claim the ancient right of all people not only to survive unhindered, but also to participate as equals in man's inheritance here on earth. We fight to preserve ourselves, to see that the treasured ways of our life in common are not destroyed by brutal men or heedless institutions. We charge genocide, indeed we do. For we would save ourselves and our children. History has taught us prudence. We do not need to wait until Dachau's and Belsons and the Buchenwalds are built to know that we are dying. We live with death, and it is ours. Death not so obvious as Hitler's ovens, not yet, but who can tell? Black men were brought to this country to serve an economy which needed our labor. And even when our slavery was over, there was still the need for us in the American economy as cheap labor. We picked the cotton, dug the ditches, shined the shoes, swept the floors, hustled the baggage, watched the clothes, cleaned the toilets. We did the dirty work for all America. That was our place, the place where the American economy needed us to be. As long as we stayed in our place, in that place, there at the bottom, we were welcome to love and work in America. The murder practiced against us then was partial and selective. A limited genocide meant not so much to exterminate us. America still had a job for good niggers to do, as to want us, to correct us, to use those of us who would not submit as examples of what could happen to the rest of us. Those who objected to being kept in their place at the bottom were beaten or killed for being uppity. Those who challenged our racist overlords, claiming for themselves and us our rights as men, as citizens, were burned for being insolent, lynched to teach the rest of us always to stay in our place. But a revolution, a profoundest import, is taking place in America. Every year, our economy produces more and more goods and services with fewer and fewer men. Hard and unskilled work, the kind nobody else wanted, that made us welcome in America. The kind of work that we niggers have always done is fast disappearing. Even in the South, in Mississippi, for example, 95% and more of the cotton is picked by machine. Mm, okay. Wow. It's picked by machine. And in the North, as I write, more than 30% of the black teenage youth is unemployed. The point that I'm getting to is that for the first time, black labor is expendable. The American economy does not need it anymore. What will a racist society do to a subject population for which it no longer has any use? Will America, in a sudden gush of reason, good conscience, and common sense, reorder her priorities, revamp her institutions, clean them of racism, so that blacks and Puerto Ricans and American Indians and Mexican Americans can be and fully and will be fully and and meaningfully included on an equal basis? Or will America grow meaner and more desperate as she confronts the just demands of her clamorous outcast? Choose genocide. America, of course, is not an abstraction. America's people. America's you and me. America will choose a final analysis as we choose to build a world of racial and social justice for each and for all, or try the fascist alternative, a deliberate policy on a mass scale of practices she already knows too well, of murderous skills she sharpens each day in Vietnam, of genocide and final mutual death. We charge genocide not only of the past, but of the future. And we swear it must not, it shall not, it will not happen to our people. It's August 17th, 1977. It's 50 years ago. And we're looking at this vaccination, people. Forward to the second edition by William Batterson. This historic petition was first presented to the world in 1951. Okay. 70 years ago. Addressed to the United Nations, it was submitted to that body in Paris, France, at the Palais Chelot, where the fifth session of the General Assembly had gathered. Simultaneously, a delegation led by Paul Robeson presented copies to the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York. We had two aims: to expose the nature and depth of racism in the United States and to arouse the moral conscience of the progressive mankind against the inhuman treatment of black nationals by those in high political places. The petition called on the UN to take notice of the fact that even a cursory examination would reveal the savage racist policy that determines the attitudes and reaction of the city and state and federal governments in their relations with black nationals. At each of these political levels, the human dignity of blacks is flouted with full enjoyment of their constitutional rights denied. Blacks face institutions of government that were steeped in racism. The petition declared that racism of the government was a criminal policy. It constituted a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, more specifically, the United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide and the Constitution of the United States of America. These racist crimes were also in violation of the most vital canons of international law. The petition asserted that if permitted to continue through the failure of other nations zealously to oppose them, the racist crimes committed in the United States would reduce the Charter to a bad joke to be laughed at by every bigot and racist in this land. The crimes complained of were a threat to the national morality, the integrity of a leading world state, and therefore to world peace. The indictment against these crimes had been drafted. It was necessary, with scrupulous care, to adduce concrete evidence of the vicious and intolerable racist policies on which this petition was based. That was thoroughly done. A summary and prayer for relief outlining specific remedial steps followed. The United Nations did not respond to the petition. Profound changes, however, have taken place in the world since 1951. At the same time, racism has grown consistently more vicious. It now constitutes a basic feature of the drive of the U.S. reaction towards a fascist-like police state. The United Nations Human Rights Commission has, in the interim period, debated the matter of human rights at great length. It has passed numerous conventions and resolutions condemning the debasement of human dignity. It has, however, not leveled this charge of criminality at the United States as it has at the South African Republic. Yet, its conclusions give affirmation to the indictment against the racist crimes committed in the citadel of the free world. 20 years after the submission of this petition to the UN, the charges then made can be materially enlarged. A characteristic feature of the life in this United States is the murderous brutality towards colored citizens in and out of the ghettos in which they are forced to live. The use of state troopers to suppress their democratic demonstrations seeking enjoyment of their inalienable and constitutional rights. Coupled with this policy is the increasing use of black nationals as armed gendarmes to force America's murderous brand of democracy upon the foreign peoples. Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia are proof of the last allegation. Civil Rights Commission, created and mandated successfully by Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, to examine into and report on the economic, political, and cultural situation confronting blacks, have recorded massive violations of their rights and dignity. A vast array of statistical materials culled by government agents and private investigators exist, revealing that the discriminatory conditions have shortened greatly the lifespans of blacks as compared to whites. The miseducation in ghetto schools is psychologically more disturbing than the educational institutions generally. The misery and squalor of the black ghetto slums beggar description. A false brand of criminality is constantly stamped on the brow of black youth by courts and systematically kept there, creating the fiction that blacks are criminally minded people. Unemployment and underemployment are infinitely higher among blacks due to discrimination and hiring policies and the low technical development afforded their youth. The ghetto has been made a cesspool for those who traffic in narcotics and a diabolical attempt to destroy the physical being of blacks. White ideologists proclaim those conditions are as blacks want them to be. White ideologists skillfully and cuttingly twist the facts that expose the evils of racism to enable them to insert the inherent inferiority of blacks. Thus, they seek to give credence to the myths of white superiority. Force and violence systematically and consistently employed to quell the righteous anger of blacks is justified by calling the murder an exercise of law and order. Thus, the lies against the blacks are propped up ideologically. We have an economy that dehumanizes those that accept and support it, as well as its foremost victims. In our introduction to the early editions of We Charge Genocide, we wrote, "History has shown that racist theory of a government of the United States is not a private affair of Americans, but the concern of mankind everywhere. Life gives proof of the correctness of this statement. It is now historically necessary and also incredibly easy to submit proof that racism USA is an export commodity breeding aggressive wars and threatening the peace of the world. Life produces that evidence. We submit it. Again, I assert that the wantonly murderous and predatory racist attacks in Korea, Vietnam, and Cambodia prove. These criminal wars are inseparably related to the equally criminal murders of rebellious black youth in Chicago, Illinois, New Haven, Connecticut, Augusta, Georgia, and Jackson, Mississippi. The crime of these black youths was their color, plus the determination not to accept racism or be intimidated by its force and violence. The crimes of these races are the crimes of a desperate class and those it has dehumanized. The crimes of our foreign foes are that they want control of their own destinies and that their lands are rich with raw materials worth billions to the imperialists. There are those with political power who believe that aggressive wars will force acceptance of their moral bankruptcy, their ideological corruption, the grievous and incurable economic ills their systems sow, and their myths of white superiority. They are wrong. Racism and predatory wars have already sustained major moral defeats at home and abroad. At home and abroad, the end will inevitably be against the racist and neocolonialist. History has doomed them to defeat. That is where we come in. Developing a national liberation struggles expose the hypocrisy of the colonial wars, who are members of the UN. It is now obvious that not all of those who signed the historic charter in San Francisco in 1945 were determined to build an international institution geared to peace, freedom, and the equality of large and small nations. It might be well to remind the reader who takes this petition up that the American delegation sent to San Francisco in 1945 to establish the United Nations was headed by noted imperialist Edward R. Stettinius, who was at that time the U.S. Secretary of State, and Tom Connally, U.S. Senator from Texas, who was an infamous racist. To regard either of these men as representatives of a nation as such as to ignore their racism, their contempt for the poor, and their condoning of terror. Neither they nor those for whom they signed the charter had any love for peace or freedom. President Roosevelt at an earlier moment had called them economic royalists. Theirs was a divine right of robber barons. These were men of a breed of those responsible for the Cold War. They were the men steeped in bigotry and racialism. Not a colored man was among the U.S. delegates who signed the charter. Not a member of the working class was there. But a delegation to the UN could not have signed the Charter of the United Nations without aim or purpose. It was to be for those who represented institutions through which, with the aid of their quislings in Asia and Latin America, that they could further their Cold War programs and export their racist policies. 3 years intervened, with unprecedented growth and development of the socialistic bloc of nations, of peace-seeking states, the national liberation struggles in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the United States, and the democratic struggle of the organized force in the free world. The UN is today not the same organization that in 1945 it was sired by the free world, wanting a new war against the socialist countries and mothered by a new world desirous of peace. Through the moral, economic, political, and ideological power of the new emerging world of socialism, through the national liberation movements of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, both the composition of the UN and its character are changing. To further expose the hypocrisy of U.S. rulers, and it's historically necessary that the black nationals and freedom loving American whites return again to the UN with the charge of genocide against black, brown, red, and yellow, and a prayer for relief. American racism can be brought to the dock in the councils of the UN through mass action. It is politically infantile to argue that another appeal to the UN can or will force the United States to become inherent to the aims and principles and purposes of that international body. Such an appeal can, however, mobilize worldwide action against genocide. We must not forget the words uttered by Justice Robert H. Jackson at the trial of the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg, Germany. We quote, "How a government treats its own inhabitants generally is thought to be no concern of other governments or of international society. Certainly, few oppressions or cruelties would warrant the intervention of foreign powers, but the German mistreatment of Germans is now known to surpass in magnitude and savagery any limits of what is tolerable by modern civilization. Other nations, by silence, would take a consenting part in such crimes. These Nazi persecutions, moreover, take on a character as international crimes because of the purposes for which they were undertaken. We say that this applies to racism and the racists in the United States. The mistreatment of black nationals by the white ruling class surpasses in savagery the limits of this free economy. There is no question that the treatment of blacks in the United States violates all provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it violates the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, that Racism USA is genocidal in character and oft times questioned by liberals and intellectuals. Even a cursory examination of the question reveals that killing of members of a group is notoriously true. That psychological impact of those murders and of Jim Crow and segregation in their subtle and covert forms does extreme mental harm to the group. America's racism is bringing about in part the physical destruction of a group, and its span of life reveals that fact. Measures to prevent birth within the group are practiced in several states. It's talking about abortion, y'all. The reports of the Presidential Commission on Civil Rights reveal the genocidal character of Racism USA. The failure to act upon them verifies the content of the indictment and indicates that if there is to be fundamental change, it must come through the action of the people. It has recently been alleged that racism has split the nation along the color line. We, the people, can mend the split. A nation divided against itself is at the mercy of demagogues and the enemies of freedom, and of democracy of the people and for the people and by them. History dictates the cure, a people united in struggle for the peace of the world and for their own security. This is written with the hope that it will help affect this unity. Our country is a multinational population. It is up to the people to give it a democracy embracing all who stand for equality of rights and opportunities. It is our unity in struggle lies the fate of our country and its people. In our country's future lies peace and freedom of millions of its people. Control the future. History calls for an end to genocidal relations at home and abroad. This petition is called for by history, and the people are its bearers. August 17, 1970. Are y'all with me? I see we got 90 people. I say we do a few more minutes of this, because I'm going to pick back up and I'm going to come up behind this with some Dr. King. Let me see how much I can do. I got 28 pages if I can get through it. Introduction. Out of the inhuman black ghettos of American cities, out of the cotton plantations of the South, comes this record of mass slayings on the basis of race, of lives deliberately warped and distorted by the willful creation of conditions making for premature death, poverty, and disease. It is a record that calls aloud for condemnation for an end to these terrible injustices that constitute a daily and ever-increasing violation of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is sometimes incorrectly thought that genocide means the complete and definitive destruction of a race or a people. The Genocide Convention, however, adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 9, 1948, defines genocide as any killing on the basis of race, or, in its specific words, as killing members of the group. Any intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group is genocide, according to the Convention. Thus, the Convention states, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group is genocide as well as killing members of the group. We maintain, therefore, that the oppressed Negro citizens of the United States, segregated, discriminated against, and long targets of violence suffer from genocide as a result of the consistent, conscious, unified policies of every branch of government. The Civil Rights Congress has prepared and submits this petition to the General Assembly of the United Nations on behalf of the Negro people in interest of peace and democracy, charging the government of the United States of America with the violation of the Charter of the United Nations and the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We believe that in the issuing of this document, we are discharging a historic responsibility to the American people, as well as rendering a service of inestimable value to the progressive mankind. We speak of the American people because millions of white Americans in the ranks of the labor and the middle classes, particularly those that live in the southern states, are often contemptuously called poor whites, are themselves suffering to an ever greater degree of the consequences of the Jim Crow segregation policy of the government and in its relationship with Negro citizens. We speak of progressive mankind because of a policy of discrimination at home must inevitably create racist commodities for export abroad, must inevitably tend toward war. We have not dealt here with the cruel and inhuman policy of this government towards the people of Puerto Rico, impoverished and reduced to a semi-literate state through the wanton exploitation and oppression by gigantic American concerns, through the merciless frame-up and imprisonment of hundreds of his sons and daughters. This colony of the rulers of the United States reveals in all of its stark nakedness the moral bankruptcy of this government and those who control its home and foreign policies. History has shown that the racist theory of government of the USA is not a private affair of Americans, but the concern of mankind everywhere. It is our hope, and we fervently believe that it was the hope and aspiration of every black American whose voice was silenced forever through premature death at the hands of racist-minded hooligans or Klan terrorists, that the truth recorded here will be made known to the world, that it will speak with the tongue of fire, loosing an unquenchable moral crusade, the universal response to which will sound the death knell of all racist theories. We have scrupulously kept within the purview of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which is held to embrace those acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, ethnical, racial, or religious groups as such. We particularly pray for the most careful reading of this material by those who have always regarded genocide as a term to be used only where the acts of terror evince an intent to destroy a whole nation. We further submit that this Convention on Genocide is, by virtue of our avowed acceptance of the Covenant of the United Nations, an inseparable part of the law of the United States of America. According to international law, and according to our own law, the Genocide Convention, as well as the provision of the United Nations Charter, supersedes, negates, and replaces all discriminatory racist law on the books of the United States and the several states. The Hitler crimes of awful magnitude, beginning as they did against the heroic Jewish people, finally drenched the world in blood and left a record of maimed and tortured bodies and devastated areas such as mankind has never seen before. Justice Robert H. Jackson, who now sits upon the United States Supreme Court bench, described this Holocaust to the world in the powerful language with which he opened the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi leaders. Every word he voiced against the monstrous Nazi beast applies with equal weight, we believe, to those who are guilty of the crimes herein set forth. Here we present the documented crimes of federal, state, and municipal governments of the United States of America, the dominant nation and the United Nations, against 15 million of its own nationals, the Negro people of the United States. These crimes are of the gravest concern to mankind. The General Assembly of the United Nations, by reason of the United Nations Charter and of the Genocide Convention itself, is invested with the power to receive this indictment and act on it. The proof of this fact is its action upon similar complaint of the government of India against South Africa. We call on the United Nations to act and to call on the government of the United States to account. We believe that the test of the basic goals of a foreign policy is inherent in the manner in which a government treats its own nationals, and it is not to be found in the lofty platitudes that pervade so many treaties or constitutions. The essence lies not in the form, but rather in the substance. The Civil Rights Congress is a defender of the constitutional liberties, human rights, and peace. It is the implacable enemy of every creed, philosophy, social system, or way of life that denies democratic rights or one iota of human dignity to any human being because of color, creed, nationality, or political belief. We ask all men and women of goodwill to unite and to realize the objectives set forth in the summary and the prayer concluding this petition, that we believe that this program can go towards ending the threat of a third world war. We believe it can contribute to the establishment of a people's democracy on a universal scale. But may we add in the final note that the Negro people desire equality of opportunity in this land where their contributions to the economic and political developments have been of splendid proportions and in quality second to none. They will accept nothing less and continue efforts to force them into a category of second-class citizens through force and violence, through segregation, racist law, and institutionalized oppression can only end in disaster for those responsible. Respectfully submitted by the Civil Rights Congress as a service to the people of the world, and particularly the lovers of peace and democracy in the United States of America, William L. Patterson, National Executive of the Civil Rights Congress. I'm going to read some more of this. And I'm going to at least read the first part. Y'all like this? Is this okay with y'all? Part 1, Opening Statement. A review of the case and an offer of proof giving something of the scope of the historical background of genocide being committed against the Negro people of the United States. To the General Assembly of the United Nations, the responsibility of being first in history to charge the government of the United States of America with the crime of genocide is not one you petitioners take lightly. The responsibility is particularly grave when citizens must charge their own government with mass murder of its own nationals, with institutionalized suppression and persistent slaughter of the Negro people in the United States on the basis of race, a crime abhorred by mankind and prohibited by the conscience of the world as expressed in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 9th, 1949. 48, I'm sorry. Genocide leads to fascism and war. It is our duty. If our duty is unpleasant, it is historically necessary, both for the welfare of the American people and for the peace of the world. We petition as American patriots, sufficiently anxious to save our countrymen and all mankind from the horrors of wars, to shoulder a task as painful as it is important. We cannot forget Hitler's demonstration that genocide at home can become a wider massacre abroad, and that domestic genocide develops into a larger genocide that is predatory war. The wrongs of which we complain are so much the expression of the predatory American reaction and its own government that civilization cannot ignore them nor risk their continuance without courting its own destruction. We agree with those members of the General Assembly who declare that genocide is a matter of world concern because its practice imperils world safety. But if the responsibility of your petitioners is great, it is dwarfed by the responsibility of those guilty of the crimes we charge. Seldom in human annals has so iniquitous a conspiracy been so gilded with the trappings of respectability. Seldom has mass murder on the score of race been so sanctified by law, so justified by those that demand free elections abroad, even as they kill fellow citizens who demand free elections at home. Never have so many individuals been so ruthlessly destroyed amid so many tributes to the sacredness of the individual. The distinctive trait of this genocide is a cant that mouths aphorisms of the Anglo-Saxons' jurisprudence even as it kills. The genocide of which we complain is as much a fact as gravity. The whole world knows of it. The proof is in every day's newspapers, in everyone's sight and hearing in these United States. In one form or another, it has been practiced for more than 300 years, although never with such sinister implications for the welfare and peace of the world as it is at present. Its very familiarity disguises its horror. It is a crime so embodied in law, so explained away by specious rationale, so hidden by the talk of liberty, that even the conscience of the tender-minded is sometimes dull. Yet the conscience of mankind cannot be beguiled from its duty by the pious phrases of the deadly legal euphemisms with which its perpetrators seek to transform their guilt and to high moral purpose. Yet petitioners will prove that a crime which we complain is, in fact, genocide within the terms and the meaning of the United Nations Convention providing for the prevention and punishment of this crime. We shall submit evidence, tragically voluminous, of acts committed as an intent to destroy and whole apart a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, in this case, 15 million Negro people in the United States. We shall submit evidence of proving killing members of the group in violation of Article 2 of the Convention. We cite killings by police, killings by incited gangs, killings by night by masked men, killings always on the basis of race, killings by the Ku Klux Klan, an organization which is chartered by several states as a semi-official arm of government and even granted tax exemptions of a benevolent society. Our evidence concerns the thousands of Negroes who, over the years, have been beaten to death on chain gangs and in back rooms of sheriff's offices, in cells of county jails, in precinct police stations, on city streets, who have been framed and murdered by sham legal forms and by legal bureaucracy. It concerns those Negroes who have been killed, allegedly for failure to say sir or to tip their hats or move aside quickly enough, or, more often, on trumped up charges of rape, but in reality for trying to vote or otherwise demanding the legal and inalienable rights and privileges of the United States citizen formally guaranteed them by the Constitution of the United States, rights denied them on the basis of race in violation of the Constitution of the United States, the United Nations Charter, and the Genocide Convention. We shall offer proof of economic genocide, or in the words of the convention, proof of deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction in whole or in part. We shall prove that such conditions so swell the infant and maternal death rate and the death rate from disease that the American Negro is deprived, when compared with the remainder of the population of the United States, of 8 years of life on the average. Further, we shall show the deliberate national oppression of these 15 million Negro Americans on the basis of race to perpetuate the conditions of life. Negroes are the last hired and the first fired. They are forced in the city ghettos or in their rural equivalents. They are segregated legally or through sanctioned violence into filthy, disease-bearing housing and deprived of, by law, of adequate medical care and education. From birth to death, Negro Americans are humiliated and persecuted in violation of the Charter and the Convention. They are forced by threat of violence and imprisonment into inferior segregated accommodations, into Jim Crow buses, Jim Crow trains, Jim Crow hospitals, Jim Crow schools, Jim Crow theaters, Jim Crow restaurants, Jim Crow housing, and finally into Jim Crow cemeteries. We shall prove that the object of this genocide, as of all genocide, is the perpetuation of economic and political power by a few through the destruction of a political protest by the many. Its method is to demoralize and to divide an entire nation. Its end is to increase the profits and unchallenged control of a reactionary clique. We shall show that those responsible for this crime are not the humble, but the so-called great. Not the American people, but their masters. Not the convict, but the rogue judge. Not the criminal, but the police. Not the spontaneous mob, but the organized terrorists licensed and approved by the state to incite a Roman holiday. We shall offer evidence that this genocide was not plotted in the dark, but incited over the radio into the ears of millions, urged in the glare of public forums by senators and governors. It is offered as an article of faith by powerful political organizations such as the Dixiecrats, defended by influential newspapers, all in violation of the United Nations Charter and Convention forbidding genocide. This proof does not come from the enemies of white supremacists, but from their own mouths, their own writings, their own political resolutions, their racist laws, and from their photographs of their handiwork. Neither Hitler nor Goebbels wrote obscurantist racial incitements more voluminously or viciously than do their American counterparts, nor did such incitement circulate in Nazi mails any more freely than they do in the mails of the United States. Through this and other evidence, we shall prove the crimes of genocide is the result of a massive conspiracy, more deadly in that it is sometimes understood rather than expressed as part of the mores of the ruling class, often concealed by euphemisms, but always directed at oppressing the Negro people. Its members are so well drilled, so rehearsed over the generations that they can carry out their parts automatically and with a minimum of spoken direction. They have inherited their plot, and their business is but to implement it daily so it works daily. The implementation is sufficiently expressed in decision and statute, in depressed wages, and robbing millions of the vote and millions more of the land, and countless political and economic facts as to reveal definitively the existence of a conspiracy backed by reactionary interests in which there enmeshed all the organs of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. It is in manifest that a people cannot be consistently killed over the years on the basis of race, and more than 10,000 Negroes have suffered death, cannot be uniformly segregated, despoiled, impoverished, and denied equal protection before the law unless it is the result of the deliberate, all-pervasive policy of government and those who control it. We shall now, more particularly, how terror, how killing members of the group in violation of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention has been used to prevent the Negro people from voting in huge and decisive areas of the United States in which they are in preponderant population, thus dividing the whole American people, emasculating mass movements for democracy, and securing the grip of predatory reaction on the federal, state, county, and city governments. We shall prove that the crimes of genocide offered for your action and the world's attention have, in fact, been incited and punishable under Article 3 of the Convention, of the Convention, often by such officials as governors, senators, judges, and peace officers, whose phrases about white supremacy and the necessity of maintaining an inviolate white electorate resulted in bloodshed as surely as more direct incitement. We shall submit evidence showing the existence of mass American law written, as was Hitler's law, solely on the basis of race, providing for segregation and otherwise penalizing the Negro people, and violation not only of Articles 2 and 3 of the Convention, but also in violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Finally, we shall offer proof that the conspiracy exists in which the government of the United States and the Supreme Court, its Congress, its executive branch, as well as various state, county, and municipal governments, consciously effectuate policies which result in the crime of genocide being consistently and constantly practiced against the Negro people of the United States. Many of your Negro petitioners are Negro citizens to whom the charges herein described are not mere words. They are facts felt on our bodies, crimes inflicted on our dignity. We struggle for deliverance without pride in our valor, but we warn mankind that our fate is theirs. We solemnly declare that the continuance of this American crime against the Negro people of the United States will strengthen those reactionary American forces driving towards World War III, as certainly as the unrebuked Nazi genocide against the Jewish people strengthened Hitler in his successful drive to World War II. We, Negro petitioners, whose communities have been laid waste, whose homes have been burned and looted, whose children have been killed, whose women have been raped, who have noted with particular horror that genocidal doctrines and actions of the American white supremacists have already been exposed to the colored people of Asia. We solemnly warn that a nation which practices genocide against its own nationals may not be long deterred if it has the power from genocide elsewhere. White supremacy at home makes for colored massacres abroad. Both reveal a contempt for human life and a colored skin. Gelid gasoline in Korea as the lyncher's faggot at home are connected in more ways than both result in death by fire. The lyncher and the atom bomb are related. The first cannot murder unpunished and unrebuked without so encouraging the latter that the peace of the world and the lives of millions are endangered. Nor is this metaphysics. The tie binding both is economic, profit, and political control. It is not without significance that it was President Truman who spoke of the possibility of using the atomic bomb on the colored people of Asia. That is the American statement who prats constantly of Asiatic hordes. Our humanity denied and mocked. We Negro petitioners protest this genocide as Negroes, and we protest as Americans, as patriots. We know no American can truly be free while 15 million other Americans are persecuted on the grounds of race, that few Americans can be prosperous while 15 million are deliberately pauperized. Our country can never know true democracy while millions of its citizens are denied the vote on the basis of their color. Above all, we protest this genocide as human beings whose very humanity is denied and mocked. We cannot forget that the Congressman Henderson Lovelace Lanham of Rome, Georgia, speaking in the halls of Congress, called William L. Patterson, one of the leaders of the Negro people, a goddamn black son of a bitch. He added, "We got to keep the black apes down." We cannot forget it because it is the animating sentiment of the white supremacists of a powerful segment of American life. We cannot forget that many in American states that it is a crime for a white person to marry a Negro on the racist theory that Negroes are inherently inferior and as an immutable fact of nature. The whole institution of segregation, which is training for killing, education for genocide, is based on the Hitler-like theory of the inherent inferiority of the Negro. The tragic fact that segregation is the basis for the statement too often heard after the murder in the South, "Why, I think no more of killing a nigger than of killing a dog." We petition in the first instance because we're compelled to speak by the unending slaughter of Negroes. The fact of our ethnic origin, by which we are proud, our ancestors were building the world's first civilization 3,000 years before our oppressors emerged from barbarism in the forests of Western Europe, is make the daily signal for segregation and murder. There's infinite variety of cruelty we will catalog, but each case has a common denominator of racism. This opening statement is not the place to present our evidence in detail. Still, in this summary of what is to be proved, we believe it necessary to show something that threw me off. Let me go back. This opening statement is not the place to present our evidence in detail. Still, this summary of what is to be proved, we believe is necessary to show something of the crux of our case, something of the pattern of genocidal murder, the technique of incitement to genocide, and the methods of mass terror. Our evidence begins in 1945 and continues to the present. It gains in deadlines and in the number of cases almost in direct ratio to the surge towards the war. We are compelled to hold that in the 6 years in the span of this document, it is to be brought into manageable portions. There was a time when racist violence had its center in the South, but the Negro people spread to the north, east, and west, seeking to escape the Southern hell. The violence, impelled in the first instance by the economic motives, followed them, its cause also economic. Once most of the violence against Negroes occurred in the countryside, but that was before the Negro immigrations of the 1920s and 1930s. Now there's not a great American city, from New York to Cleveland to Detroit, from Washington, the nation's capital, to Chicago, from Memphis to Atlanta to Birmingham, from New Orleans to Los Angeles, that is not disgraced by the wanton killing of innocent Negroes. It is no longer a sectional phenomenon. Once the classic method of lynching was the rope, now it is the policeman's bullet. Too many American police are in the government, certainly its most visible representative. We submit that the evidence suggests the killing of Negroes has become police policy in the United States, and the police policy is the most practical expression of government policy. Our evidence is admittedly incomplete. It is our hope that the United Nations will complete it. Much of the evidence, particularly violence, was gained from the files of Negro newspapers, from the labor press, and from the annual reports of Negro societies and established Negro yearbooks, a list is appended. But by far the majority of Negro murders are never recorded, never known except to the perpetrators and the bereaved survivors of the victims. Negro men and women leave their homes and are never seen alive again. Sometimes weeks later, their bodies thought to be theirs, and often horribly mutilated, are found in the woods or washed up on the shore of a river or lake. It is a well-known pattern of American culture. In many sections of the country, the police don't even bother to record the murder of Negroes. Most white newspapers have a policy of not publishing anything concerning the murders of Negroes or assaults upon them. These unrecorded deaths, as a rule, rather than the exception. Thus, our evidence, though voluminous, is scanty when compared with actuality. We Negro petitioners are anxious that the General Assembly know that our tragic cause celebrate ignored by the American white press, but known nevertheless the world over, but we wish to inform it out of the virtual unknown, killed almost casually, as almost an incidental aspect of institutionalized murder. We want the General Assembly to know of Willie McGee, framed on a perjured testimony and murdered in Mississippi because the Supreme Court of the United States refused to even examine vital new evidence proving his innocence. But we also wanted to know that two Negro children, James Lewis Jr., 14 years old, and Charles Trudell, 15, of Natchez, Mississippi, were electrocuted in 1947 after the Supreme Court refused to intervene. We want the General Assembly to know that the martyred Martinville 7, who died in the Virginia electric chair for rape they never committed, in a state that has never executed the white man for that offense. We wanted to know, too, that 8 Negro prisoners who were shot down and murdered on July 11th, 1947 in Brunswick, Georgia. Hey, y'all, this is where this boy got shot this summer, Ahmaud Arbery, Brunswick, Georgia, because they refused to work in a snake-infested swamp without boots. We shall inform the Assembly of the Trenton Six, of Paul Washington, the Daniels cousins, Jerry Newsom, Wesley Robert Wells, of Rose Lee, Ingram, and John Derrick, of Lieutenant Gilbert, of the Columbia, Tennessee destruction, the Freeport slaughter, the Monroe killings, all important cases in which Negroes have been framed on capital charges or have been actually killed. But we also want to know the typical and the less known of William Brown, Louisiana farmer, shot in the back and killed when he was out hunting July 19th, 1947, by a white game warden who casually announced his unprovoked crime, saying, "I just shot a nigger, let his folks know." The game warden, one Charles Ventrill, was not even charged with the crime. We cite typical cases from the voluminous evidence. Each represents a part of the pattern of the genocide. This pattern repeats itself throughout the nation, north, south, rural, and urban. It is a pattern of government-directed and sanctioned genocide. The following of typical police killings. Henry Gilbert, beaten to death in Harris County, Georgia jail, May 1947. This was in the South. But in the North, Beverly Lee, 13, shot and killed in Detroit, Michigan on October 12, 1947 by Patrolman Louis Begin. That's a Jewish name. Mrs. Frances Verbutten of 1839 Pine Street in Detroit testified she saw Lee and another boy walking down the street when Bacon's squad car approached. She heard the officer say, "Stop, you little son of a bitch," and then she heard a shot. The officer was cleared by Coroner Lloyd K. Babcock. Roland T. Pierce, a 20-year-old veteran, was shot and killed in Rochester, New York, by 6 policemen who fired 25 bullets into his body after he had viewed the Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence on the Freedom train. He went into a restaurant where he complained he had been shot shortchanged. Patrolman William Hamill was called, drew his gun, forced Price outside, where he was joined by 5 other officers. All began shooting. All were cleared. Vernie Johnson, 35, sawmill worker in Prentiss, Mississippi, was shot to death August 1947 after he fled when a white woman raised the cry of rape. 3 officers, members of a posse, tracked Johnson down, arrested him, and charged with manslaughter. They were exonerated. Raymond Cowser was shot and killed by Patrolman Frank Caruro on Montrose Street in Philadelphia, November 16, 1947. Eyewitnesses said they saw the patrolman with the drawn revolver stalking Cowser as he walked down the street. Cowser, apparently unaware that he was being followed. The patrolman said he thought Cowser was armed and had been called to the vicinity because of a quarrel in the Cowser home. Cowser was not armed. The patrolman received no punishment. Charles Fletcher, also of Philadelphia, was shot and killed on November 16, 1947, by Patrolman Manus McGetgan, who claimed he killed him after receiving a phone call about a prowler. Fletcher had no police record, had worked for 10 years at the Exide Battery Company. Charles Curry, 23, slain by patrolman Nolan O. Ray in Dallas, Texas, on December 17, 1947, on a bus. Ray, in civilian clothes, had ordered the Negro sitting beside him to move. The Negro passenger complained. Ray jumped to his feet, drew his revolver, and ordered all Negroes to take their hands out of their pocket. When Curry did not comply swiftly enough, Ray shot and killed him. Ray was dismissed from the force and indicted for murder. George Thomas, Negro youth, was shot and killed in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Patrolman claimed that Thomas tried to escape after being arrested February 2nd, 1948. A Negro prisoner on May 23, 1948, in Augusta, Georgia, was beaten to death by a prison guard when he refused to work in the snake-infested ditch. Roy Cyril Brooks in Gretna, Louisiana, was shot and killed on February 27, 1948, by Patrolman Alvin Bladsacker. Brooks was a prominent trade unionist. He was involved in an argument with the bus driver when Bladsacker pulled him off the bus and killed him. James Tolliver of Little Rock, Arkansas, was beaten to death in February 1948 by Patrolman Blaylock. Tolliver was trying to help a drunken woman when Blaylock came up behind him and struck him on the head. He died almost instantly. John Johnson was slain in Birmingham, Alabama. Police claim he was resisting arrest on May 29, 1948. Alma Shaw was slain by Birmingham police on April 19, 1948, who claimed she was resisting arrest. Marion Franklin Noble was slain in Birmingham by police on April 27, 1948, who said he resisted arrest. Willie Johnson was shot to death May 3, 1949, by 2 Brunswick, Georgia policemen who claimed that he was looking at a house suspiciously. This is where Ahmaud Arbery got killed for the same thing, they say. Johnson had been a resident of Brunswick for 14 years, was a county employee, and a deacon at St. Paul's Baptist Church. Robert J. Evans, 86 years old, a patriarch of Norfolk, Virginia, was shot and seriously wounded on December 12, 1950, by Patrolman E.M. Morgan, who said the old man assaulted him. Danny Bryant of Covington, Louisiana, was shot and killed on November of 1948 by Patrolman Kinsey Jenkins after Bryant refused to remove his hat in the presence of whites. Herman Glasper, 30, was shot and killed in Bryan County, Georgia, during the week of January 2nd, 1949, by Corporal D.E. Watson of Georgia State Trooper. Glasper had been arrested on suspicion of stealing a hog. Sheriff E. Miles said that the shooting was an accident. Charles Pfeiffer was shot in the back and killed in the home of his stepmother in Bronx, New York, by Patrolman Eugene Stossuk on January 16, 1949. The patrolman claimed he shot Pfeiffer in the back in self-defense. George Waddell was shot in the back in Brooklyn, New York, in the home of Brooklyn police on February 18, 1949. The police entered his home without a warrant, with no offense charged against Waddell. They claimed they were looking for a gambling game when they forced entry into Waddell's home. No evidence of gambling was found. Ike Crawford, 29-year-old prisoner of Richmond County, Georgia, was beaten to death on June 5, 1948 by guards David L. Turner and Horace Wingert and Alvin Jones. The men were indicted for prison brutality. A coroner's jury, however, reported that Crawford died of liver disease. Oh my God, I'm seeing something here that's going to upset me. Lord Jesus, help me, God. Look at this. This is going to blow my mind. Look at this, y'all. Other race murders. Not all murders or assaults are by police. Some result from segregation, from living in fire traps, or from denying badly injured Negroes entry into hospitals because of their color. Others result from constant declaration and determination of white supremacists that Negroes have no rights, that a white man is bound to respect. The following cases are typical. Listen to this. Wow, this one. Mr. and Mrs. O'Day Short. Wow. This got me here. And their two little girls were burned to death before Christmas in a fire incendiary origin set by persons that did not want them to move into a white neighborhood in Fontana, California. They had received threatening notes, and the police informed them that they were out of bounds. While the family was away, the house was sprayed with an inflammable chemical. When the match was lighted upon the family's return, there was an explosion. All four were fatally burned. Strong possibility that those folks are a family of mine. Imagine. Whole family wiped out. Mm. 3 Negro children, Ruby Nell Harris, Mary Burnside, and Frankie Thurman at Kosciusko, Mississippi, were slain on January 8th, 1950 by 3 white men, Leon Turner, Malcolm White, and Wendell Witt, who raped Pauline Thurman, 17, and shot Thomas Harris, a father and stepfather of the children. Harris died of his wounds. Turner and Wendell received life sentences. Malcolm White was sentenced 10 years. Now, look, I want to stop for a second. I hadn't seen this in a long time. This is probably the only case of a rape where a black woman's raped by a white man that you see a conviction. Y'all need to just take this case down. This is the one. This is either the case I saw many years ago, or one of 2 instances where white men have been convicted of raping black women in all my years of reading. There's another case in Mississippi in 1956. Only 2 cases. I'm about to stop here. Matthew Avery, a student at North Carolina A&T College, died after an auto accident December 8th, 1950, when he was refused admittance to Duke Hospital at Durham. He died an hour later. I'm going to stop on page 12. We've done 3 hours worth of sex. Who you going to call? Coon Buster, baby. I'm going to send out a notice. We're going to pick this back up. How y'all doing? I'm going to take my nap. See y'all. Y'all be good. I'm out.